Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The Corver family was not starstruck, but they were not poor either. It was an average intellectual family. The head of the family, Nick Corver, worked as a math teacher at school. His wife, Sophia, worked in the village administration. Corver had a daughter, Helen. They would have been happy to give the girl a brother or sister, but the state of health did not allow Sophia to become a mother. The second time they lived amicably. In the summer, they went to the mountains, to the lake, or campgrounds as a family. And in the cold time, Corver loved to arrange family gatherings together, cooked hot pastries, or own or captive bags under fragrant aromatic tea. All remarks to each other, if any, sounded not at all offensive and were taken rather as jokes. Unlike many teenagers, Helen Corver had only heard firsthand what strained family relationships and parental misunderstandings were like. Whatever happened to her, Helen could always trust her parents and count on their help. In the family reigned love, understanding, and mutual respect. If there was something that marred the happiness of the family, it was the relationship between Nick and his mother-in-law. The situation is anecdotal, except he wouldn't be laughing. Dear Wendy apparently considered it her duty almost every day to visit them and give valuable instructions, or rather to poke her nose into everything in her field of vision. Why is your porch wobbling? Looking disapprovingly in the direction of her son-in-law, Wendy said, "What are you in the house for, man? It's like this every time. That the beds are not to dig, that the grass is low, that here to catch a cold." A separate topic was the closet of my wife and daughter. A real man should dress up his women. My mother-in-law insisted. When Sophia saw a beautiful dress on TV and said she wanted the same Nick. "Well, right, honestly, what do you have them wearing?" Helen looked at her tracksuit and shrugged her shoulders. It didn't escape Grandma's eyes. "You're going someplace decent, or else there's nothing to do." Solemnly, Wendy summed it up. "Mom, what do you mean by a decent place?" Sophia grinned. "A theater or a restaurant? We don't go to them." "You should." "Oh, and what though?" "Not in a tracksuit." Sophia is tempted to reply that she and her late father were not regulars at such places either, but she changes her mind. After all, Mom is Mom, and she wants her daughter to have everything she needs for a happy life. And thank God that Nick preferred to keep his mouth shut, for he didn't like conflict. Nick Corver really did not like conflicts, but adored his girls. For their sake, Corver was ready to endure anyone, including squabbling and restless mother-in-law and soft character of Nick Konstantinovich. His relatives noticed it, shook their heads, and expressed their discontent. "Yes, she's just riding you," said Betty, Nick's sister. "Mark my word, it won't end well," and she was right. It all started with Sophia's promotion. Years ago, Sophia, a college graduate, joined the local government. Simply put, she got a job as a secretary. Then she was lucky. The previous secretary was just going on maternity leave. After the position of secretary was removed from the staff schedule, Sophia was not left without a job. She became a specialist and finally reached the position of vice chairman. Her duties have increased, but also the salary became higher. And that's what prompted a new round of attacks. Wendy on Nick, on the occasion of his wife's promotion. And to you, they slaughtered a boar. The women prepared dinner, and after a shower, Corver and their relatives gathered at a generously set table. Alas, at first hearty sit-downs with the easy hand of Wendy turned into a real balaganza. During the family feast, the elderly woman drank too much and she, as they call it, was carried away. "Shame on you," she said. "A woman and like a damned and earns, by the way, more than you." Mom warned me before Sophia started that, "Mom, I'm telling the truth. Can't we deal with this truth on our own? They'll figure it out." "Nick, do you really like your job?" "I like it," my son-in-law answered briefly. "But I like it even more when my wife earns good money." The truth, Wendy continued to stir things up. "God!" exclaimed Helen, and grabbed not a single piece of meat pie and a glass of tea, went to her room. "But what's rather reproachful?" Sophia asked her mother. "By the way, Scarlett has a scarlet transitional age, and the girl very painfully perceives your." She could not find the right words and only waved her hand, If there were another person in Wendy's place, he would have realized that he had just spoiled a peaceful family holiday and hurried to smooth over the conflict. But where was it? Strong alcohol plus a quarrelsome temper. A mixture of thermonuclear girl and scandalized. And let the girl know that her daddy is a worthless man. And what makes him worthless, I wonder. Betty obeyed, who didn't mind what she said. She organically did not like her brother's mother-in-law. And the relatives suspected that the fighting woman was just waiting to have a heart-to-heart fight with Wendy. Those present froze in anticipation of not a weak performance and were not at all deceived in their expectations. The women screamed so loud that the dishes rang. "Your brother is a shit and a lowlife," Wendy said. "Yes, my brother is a good man," contended Betty belligerently. "But you're an old schemer for your own life?" "No, you're a meddler in other people's." "What did you say?" Sophia formidably asked the relative, looming over the sister of her hated brother-in-law. But the young woman from the preamble aside and nonchalantly replied that they had heard. Live themselves to live amicably, bring up a daughter, and persuaded Betty. But no. Even on a holiday, there's no peace from you. Mom, but really my son Alexander intervened. You were sitting so well, weren't you? Eggs. Chicken is very thoughtful, threatened mother, and then came to the table, defiantly poured herself a full shot glass of vodka and drank. Didn't blush. Come on. Zatzat Satsia for this is not to give. She continued savoring the crunch of the pickle. Everyone, as one, just sighed heavily. If Wendy Medvedeva had been on her own for a long time. But why does Grandma always cling to Daddy for the umpteenth time? Helen wondered. She, of course, was still quite young, and due to the lack of life experience, still understood little. But she knew one thing about a husband like Nick. They are still to be found. He doesn't drink, helps his mother with the household chores, earns money. What else do you need? The girls sighed heavily. Voices, related from the hall, could not. Actually, it was mostly Wendy's grandmother who spoke. The others did not dare to try to contradict her, but it seems, unsuccessfully. All in all, fun, and so it was every holiday. The pork pie was getting cold and didn't look so appetizing, and I didn't feel like eating. And why do we have everything not like people? Helen thought, we're getting there. And the tea, which also began to cool down. This year, Corver's only daughter was finishing school. She had dreamed of becoming a journalist since 5th grade and was eagerly counting the days until graduation. And then Helen would go to university to study and work as a journalist. The girl imagined interviewing a celebrity. Her heart closed sweetly. God, but why do universities have to study for 5 whole years with a sigh? Helen thought, that's such a long time. She desperately wanted to go to another world where everything is beautiful, cultured, and there are no table scandals. To hell with all of you. Helen heard her grandmother's loud voice and shuddered. Don't listen to me, but in vain. After a while, the voices fell silent. A fuss was heard, and the girl realized with relief that the guests were leaving. When the house was quiet, Helen came out of her room. Her father was sitting in an armchair, obviously thinking hard about something. Don't be mad at Mom, Sophia said, picking up the plates from the table. I'm not. Nick shrugged and sighed, adding, I'm used to it. He looked so lost that Helen wanted to hug her father and say something nice to him, and what, in fact, prevented it. The girl came to Nick and, sitting on the windowsill of the chair, hugged him by the neck. Daddy, I love you very much. With tenderness, said Helen, and added, and you, Mom. I have the coolest parents in the world. Well, we are glad to hear that, Sophia smiled. But to make my joy complete, help me clear the table serving comrade-in-chief, replied the daughter, jokingly saluted. At that moment, all 3 of them were thinking about what a good family they had. But none of them suspected what changes awaited her. Sophia started her new position. Nick continued to sow the reasonable, good, eternal, and indoctrinate young minds with theorems and logarithms. And Helen dreamed of a career as a journalist. It seemed like it would be like that for many years to come. But life arranged otherwise. After a staff meeting in the district administration, Sophia went to a cafe for a snack. She made an order and having taken a table in a secluded corner of the hall with an appetite began to eat at You Are Not Busy? With a polite smile asked a solid man about 50 years old, dressed in a dark gray suit with thin stripes. Sophia shook her head. And you are the new deputy head of the administration of the village, aren't you? The man asked. That's right. Why is it nice to see another spectacular woman in such a responsible position? I forgot what's your name. Sorry, it's just a lot of names, surnames, and patronymics to memorize. Sophia Corver. She introduced herself. Oh, nice to meet you. The man stretched out. Well, I'm the head of citizen services. Thomas Parker. You've heard of him. Sophia nodded with a faint smile. Well, that's great. That day, the colleagues chatted and separated. When an administration employee came in, she knew Parker, of course. When Sophia was a specialist, she traveled to the administration office once a month with a report and sometimes ran into him in the hallway. Parker couldn't help but know Sophia by sight. After all, in so many years of work, everyone had managed to be attracted to each other. However, it had only now come to a personal acquaintance. Sophia had heard from colleagues that Parker was a womanizer. It was common for him to fix a young secretary, which, by the way, periodically changed. At one time, there were rumors that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband. It was rumored that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband, who had somehow found out that the young wife was having an affair with the head of the Department for Work with Citizens. It seems that Thomas was married twice, and from each wife he had a child. Either way, his first wife, Emily, had a great career in the same system and made it to the regional administration. Sophia had already forgotten about that lunch at the staff meeting because she had so much work to do that she had no time to remember. And what was there to remember? It was just an ordinary business lunch, of which there would be many more. Hello, is Sophia Corver there? She heard a vaguely familiar voice. I'm listening, she answered. Oh, Sophia here. This is Thomas Parker. Remember him? Yes, of course. In a discreet, businesslike manner, Sophia replied. What do you want? I'd like to make an appointment with you in the same formal tone, he said, and felt it necessary to add. A business meeting, of course. Your head is on vacation. On vacation. She confirmed it. Well then, all questions I solve with you as with, and oh, okay. What is it you'd like to discuss with me? Sophia, don't get your hopes up. With a slight chuckle in his voice, Parker replied. We'll talk about it when we meet. I'll see you at 3 p.m. When Sophia went to the reception desk, the receptionist was absent. Strange, she thought, and knocked quietly on the office door. Yes, yes, Sophia heard, a cheerful voice. Parker, and opened the door. Sophia, you've already arrived, he asked, and pointing to a soft chair next to a beautifully shaped magazine table gallantly spoke, have a seat. I will now. Sophia obediently sat down, and Thomas went into a funny room, which apparently served as a kind of kitchen, and came back with the payment and a bottle of champagne, not cheap, by the way. But there, he smiled. That seems to be it now. What's all this for? Sophia asked, and looking at the table, in the very center stood a small fruitcake, which, as far as she knew, could only be purchased in a restaurant. In addition to the cake, there were caviar cakes on the table, 3 different salads. What for? Thomas smiled broadly. It's a business meeting. I find it easier to solve issues at a set table, so to speak, in a trusting atmosphere. What's cultured and efficient, don't you think? To be honest, I hadn't thought about it, the woman replied with a shrug. She was beginning to realize that a business meeting was out of the question. That was all she needed. Parker said emphatically, even in our backwater, culture is not a bad thing. Can't hurt. Sophia nodded. What do I mean? He rejoiced. And then, when I make an appointment with a beautiful woman, no matter what the occasion, I always prepare for it properly. So what did you want to discuss with me? She took the bull by the horns. She didn't like this business meeting. What if, God forbid, someone found out about it? A lot of things. Sophia replied nonchalantly to the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. For example, about how to raise the standard of living in the neighborhood. And you want to discuss it with me personally, she grinned. Why not? And Parker steered the gas. You live in cubicles, and therefore you know the problems of the village firsthand, don't you? Well, that's just it. Champagne, pouring. And what am I really boring, Sophia thought. After all, a new position is not only new responsibilities, but also new opportunities. There is an opportunity to drink champagne and talk about life with one of the department heads, so I'll make the most of it. How long can I sit in my village and not see the light of day? And if anyone sniffs, I have nothing to be ashamed of. If I don't allow it, it won't happen. I'm not a young secretary. That's the spirit. Approved Parker and poured champagne into glasses. Well, very tasty. With a smile, said a colleague. A nice drink. I love it. I love it too, he nodded. You eat salads. Cake all in the restaurant ordered. Fresh, delicious. Surprisingly, but now the solid head of the department seemed Sophia so simple and homely. Probably that's how his family and friends knew him. It occurred to her. I wonder why he got divorced. And then she was ashamed of her thoughts. Why pry into someone else's life? Shall we do it again? Parker smiled, and not immediately heard Sophia, immersed in his own thoughts. I suggest we do it again. Is it just me, or are you tense? Everything is fine, assured the guest. I will gladly drink more champagne. Sophia, won't you be offended if the second toast is for you? The owner of the office asked not only jokingly, but also seriously. Why should it offend me? She was surprised. I don't know. Well, Thomas, champagne is good, of course. But let's get to why you invited me here. Sophia said in a businesslike tone. Our neighborhood, as you quite rightly pointed out, needs improvement. And when it comes to this particular booth, I have some thoughts. Parker grunted in surprise, but the guest smiled dazzlingly as if she hadn't noticed. We'll discuss it. The dinner was conducted in a strictly businesslike manner. Sophia realized that this was not what Parker was expecting, but there was nothing she could do to please him. He did not hint at a closer acquaintance, for he realized that he would receive a strong rebuff, and for a womanizer like Parker, that was simply unacceptable. It's embarrassing and humiliating. No, it's a gradual thing. Usually a couple of bottles of champagne was enough. I must say, the conversations about improving the standard of living in the neighborhood went well. Thomas listened to Sophia's proposal, and an hour later she called the driver. So soon. Parker stretched out disappointedly. But I guess that's the end of the matter. Corver waved her hands. He wanted to add that he had ordered a sauna, but he stopped talking. I wanted to say that you are absolutely right, smiled charmingly at the person in charge of working with citizens. I will certainly take into account all your wishes and, as they say, let's get to work. When the driver pulled up, Parker escorted Sophia to the car like a true gentleman. He wanted to kiss her hand, but came to his senses in time. Why gossip? It was one thing to spend time with a young and free employee like him, and quite another to spend time with a family woman, the deputy head of the administration. Parker gallantly opened Sophia's doors as the car moved off, admiringly thought this woman. Parker went up to his office, poured champagne, and thought deeply. The head of the department clearly understood this woman. He had a great hookup with his second wife, the same one who had a great career. Thomas had divorced 3 years ago and was no longer eager to remarry. Why should he? He never saw a woman as a free cleaning lady or a cook. But from time to time, he thought there was no need to marry. Parker was clean and, as far as time allowed, did not neglect cleaning. In addition, he was a good cook and knew a dozen interesting recipes for those who do not have time. And lately, Thomas was often ordering food from a restaurant. That's funny. What about the automatic washing machine? For what? Well, as for natural male needs, women who are ready for anything have not yet outlived someone, and serious status did not stop someone, not to mention young secretaries. Those, however, had their own interest in advancing their careers. But here Parker had an iron principle: he never made patronage to any of his own for chills. Have you tried studying? Lovely ladies. Parker had a daughter growing up from his second marriage. If he suddenly found out that Mila was trying to make a career through bed, she would be in trouble. He'd known Sophia Corver for a long time, but he'd hardly ever crossed paths with her. They used to say hello in the corridor of the district administration. Sophia was a good-looking woman back then. But he had plenty of that goodness, and he had plenty of that goodness. Thomas Parker knew perfectly well that he was considered a womanizer and did not deny it. But the people around him were wrong about something. Parker did not chase every skirt. Some quite pretty women didn't stand a chance. He didn't like or recognize vulgar and mercantile individuals at first sight. Young duck secrets didn't count. After all, youth and freshness are beyond competition. When Sophia was appointed deputy chairman of the village council, he considered it the right decision. Corver was not only an attractive woman, but also a conscientious worker and undoubtedly deserved the promotion. And after socializing with Corver, he appreciated her in every way. Suddenly, Parker thought that with such a woman I would like to live the rest of my life. And was surprised to think, what about his love of order? A culinary talent, a car, a machine, and a bunch of ladies for lovemaking. It's an interesting question, of course. The head of the Citizens Department suddenly laughed. To think he had been discovered, but not quite discovered. But for the first time in his life, a meeting with a woman had not gone according to the Parker's scenario. And yet, despite this unfortunate circumstance, the mood was great. He'd enjoyed himself, and that was worth a lot. And as for the rest, well, as they say, there's bad luck for old men. And then Thomas Parker is not used to giving up without a fight. The more difficult the task, the more interesting it is. The head of the department, drank champagne and ate cake. And looking at his watch, he called the driver. "Would you be so kind as to sign this?" He said, "The traffic will start soon, and I'm tired as a dog." "Okay, Thomas. And your application is accepted and will be considered within 3 working days," said Sophia to another visitor. "Goodbye, goodbye," replied pensioner Frank. Sophia's head had been spinning all day since that private business meeting at the district administration a week had passed. Memories of it made Sophia smile. The man had spent on the road, champagne, and hors d'oeuvres from the restaurant. And she was proud. What's pride got to do with it? She and Parker were in a purely working relationship, and she didn't think of anything else. And if that was the case, she should have made it clear to him right away. Sophia was sure that in a few days the head of the Citizens Affairs Department would forget about her. And he should have. "Sophia, the specialist Jenna told you this," and brought a small, pretty basket of blood roses into her office. "Thank you, Jenna," she nodded. Sophia already knew who the flowers were from. She felt uneasy. She had no idea how to react, and that made her feel uncomfortable. But at least I can call and say thank you, Sophia thought. "Glad you liked it," Parker replied, and there was a smile in his voice. There was an awkward silence. Sophia broke the silence. "Yes. And it would not be impertinent of me to invite you to dinner at the restaurant." "Thomas, I don't think it's necessary," Sophia replied firmly. "But why don't you really understand?" "I confess I don't. I'm a married woman. I'm in a position of authority and everything. And you, Thomas, have a tarnished reputation." He smirked. "In other words, a reputation as a womanizer." "Right. But I didn't say that," Sophia grinned back. "You don't have to say anything." "Sophia, it's just dinner." Parker didn't give up. She asked ironically. Of course, Thomas didn't hesitate. How could it not be? Suddenly, Sophia realized that she wanted to go to a restaurant. It seemed to her that she had recently fulfilled the norm of her former working life. So why not have a little celebration? I think I'd agree," Sophia said. True, Parker sounded genuinely happy. She thought again that the head of the Citizens Affairs Department, whom the neighborhood knows, and the one who was talking to her at that moment were 2 different people. "Yes," Sophia replied discreetly. Wonderfully received, Parker. Businesslike tone. "My driver will pick you up for bed at 5, she asked fearfully. "Yeah, what's the big deal?" "What time do I get home?" "Oh, Sophia," the colleague laughed. "You probably haven't heard anything yet. He has irregular working days, which is a common thing in your position. A working moment. Yes, only there's something else." "There's nothing." Sophia wanted to say that she didn't have the right dress, but thought it was unnecessary. In Sophia's opinion, a man shouldn't know about such things. She walked over to the large full-length mirror hanging in the study. What exactly is wrong with a suit? She thought. A dark blue pantsuit, intricate trim on the lapel and cuffs of the jacket. It looked very impressive. I wish I had a little more makeup and jewelry. You can do without it. The gold trim looks pretty flashy. And I think there was an elegant and wide-brimmed hat in the closet. Sophia bought it recently, but never brought it home. But here it is ready to cheer up the evening ensemble, she thought. There is only one thing left to settle Nick. I will be late tonight, Sophia told her husband. Suddenly she felt like a schoolgirl. And what are these trips? Cindy, the accountant, looked out of the window. But what's not to be clear about, snickered Jenna, escaping to the tea party hat flowers. A driver at the end of the day. And you think about it. Really? The elderly accountant gasped. And I thought she was decent. She has such a good husband. A daughter. Well, give a man a diplomat, and he'll show his true colors. And everyone knows what goes on upstairs. They're all related, for God's sake. The specialist ranted. But our doggies got it. That's right, the accountant nodded. Well, and then the sight of the little one, it seems, did not go in vain. After all, she's always oppressed Nick. Here is the result. Yes, Cindy sighed. And what a nice family they were, weren't they? Every dog in the stalls knew about the relationship between the math teacher and his mother-in-law. Moreover, it was one of the most discussed topics in the store, in the nurse's station, and of course, in the village administration. Well, now Sophia's colleagues had something to discuss. And in the light of recent events, it looked a little spicy. Cindy, please. Jenna rolled her eyes. Why worry about them? Nick, if anything, who will be there to comfort them. Everyone knows the vice principal's got a crush on him. Molly's a very attractive woman, by the way. Not like our duck. Yeah, it's like Santa Barbara all over again. The women laughed merrily and continued to grind the bones of the deputy head and the rest of the villagers. Sophia, I'm speechless. Parker exclaimed. I didn't mince words. Are you charming? Thank you, she smiled. What's the harm in that? It was a pleasure. But at the same time, a strange uneasiness settled in her soul. Maybe it was a premonition. What will you have to drink? Thomas asked. At your discretion? To be honest, I don't know much about wine. Then I'd recommend a Spanish wine, very bright, very tasty. Well then, let's have the Spanish wine. Sophia nodded. They drank the wine, which indeed turned out to be amazingly tasty. Ate shish kebab of sturgeon with spicy sweet sauce, and talked about everything in the world. Parker proved to be an interesting conversationalist, and the time flew by in a flash. My God, it was already 9:30. Sophia gasped, looking at her watch. They'll be worried at home. Thomas nodded understandingly. Well, of course, she replied and went to her purse for her phone. Where the hell did it go? Sophia cheerfully turned to her colleague. Wait a minute. Sophia waved Sophia away with annoyance, intending to dump the contents of her purse on the table. Sophia mockingly held out Parker. I apologize profusely for interrupting what appears to be a fascinating pastime, but maybe you're looking for this. He pointed with a smile to Sophia's cell phone lying on the table. And both of them, without conspiring, spluttered. Cheerfully, she said, Husband, you have not lost me. Well, great, I'll be there soon. Love you. Parker felt a prick of jealousy and sadly stated, well, I guess the banquet is over. Sophia waved her hands. It can't be helped. They're waiting for me at home. Well, if they are, when she entered the house, her husband was awake. Have you been drinking? Nick asked, looking at her intently. I had a drink, Sophia nodded. There was a small banquet after the administration meeting. Something was wrong. Was it Nick's imagination, or was there a challenge in his wife's last sentence? Why not? He shrugged. You're entitled. You weren't brought here under the arm. Yeah, the wife muttered. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Let's go to bed. The New Year's Eve corporate party for employees of the administration was prepared on a grand scale. A newly opened restaurant was engaged for this purpose. The conversations of the administration staff were all on the same topic. Ladies' outfits I have already looked through long, revealing with a cut to the thigh. But you're not wearing that kind of fire, not at my size. Oh, come on. It's not a problem. Put on a high-waisted dress and you'll be happy. You'll look slimmer and prettier, and you'll show off your legs. I want to wear red, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Girls, whose year is this? Secretaries, accountants, specialists, and higher-ranking employees resembled schoolgirls on the eve of a party. And it was a very pretty sight. Sophia, like her coworkers, was also racking her brains over what kind of outfit to buy to make everyone aha. Come on, mentally under the case, but on herself, so everyone. After that dinner at the restaurant, Sophia felt something had changed. She didn't know what it was yet, but it was obvious. And then there was that stare from Nick. Did he suspect something? There was nothing to suspect. She and Parker never saw each other again, since they were both busy with work on New Year's Eve. And yet, on Sunday, Sophia went into town to pick up her mom's dress. Well, that's so last century, Helen remarked. When the mother voiced her plans, that is, did not understand Sophia. So now everyone orders in online stores, right? Explained the girl. Yes, but what about trying it on? So it can be done at the point of delivery. Maybe, Sophia grinned. But I'm used to the old-fashioned way. You should. I will keep up with the times, she smiled and went outside. The weather was fantastic. It was warm and the snow was falling quietly. I wish we had this kind of weather at Christmas, Sophia thought dreamily and frowned. Most of the time the holidays were a challenge to her psyche. As usual, her mom would show up and start bad-mouthing Nick. What the hell? Rarely, very rarely without that cataclysm. Sophia suddenly pictured Parker in Nick's place and wondered, I wonder what kind of relationship they'd have with Mom. And the woman sighed heavily. She'd been thinking about him a lot lately. What was that about? Sophia reached the bus stop and said hello to her fellow villagers. The retired headmistress said hello and looked at her strangely. Some of the people standing at the bus stop followed her example, and Sophia felt naked. What are they looking at? 5 minutes later, Sophia's bus pulled up. Please come in, Will said kindly. A student visiting his parents for the weekend. Thank you, Will. She smiled gratefully at the guy and suddenly heard someone murmur. Tell me, please, what honors? Sophia could have been mistaken, of course, but the voice seemed to belong to Anna, Betty's friend. She had sat with Anna more than once at the same table with relatives. Sophia had always thought that Betty's friend was quite nice to her. So what's the matter? There were those looks too. Sophia took her seat and decided to keep her head down. It was no secret to her that her appointment to a new position was received ambiguously by the people. Many were genuinely happy for Sophia, noting that but she deserved the promotion. But not without detractors. God only knows what they argued their discontent. But the fact remained that there were such people. But was it worth paying attention to them? You can't please everyone philosophically, Sophia summed up. For shopping, she chose a hypermarket 2 stops away from the bus station. The market was definitely not suitable for this purpose. Sophia walked through the boutiques. Her eyes were dazzled by the variety of colors and styles. The woman stopped at a marvelously beautiful evening dress, a relay of color and rice. It would go perfectly with her dark Russian hair and gray eyes. The dress cost more than half her paycheck, but it was so beautiful. And if you pictured it with newly bought shoes, clutch sharpening, and beautiful makeup, it was fire. To take it or not to take it? That was the question. Mentally paraphrased Sophia of the famous writer Sophia. She heard a painfully familiar voice, and that was the meeting. In front of her stood none other than Parker. Hello, confused woman said. What are you doing here? Having fun? Thomas asked. I'm just picking out a dress for corporate events. A necessary thing, he approved. How's that going? I haven't picked anything out yet, Sophia admitted. Why not? It's just something. I think this purple one is really nice, Parker said in a businesslike tone, and looking at the dress she was looking at, I think Sophia thought dejectedly too. But for the money it costs, you could live on it for almost a month. You know what? Why don't I give you this dress? Thomas suggested as if he were buying a candy bar. What did the coworker fearfully ask? No, that's out of the question. But I can see you like it. You don't, he said. Do you like it? Nodded Sophia. But it's very expensive. No, Thomas, I can't accept such a gift, she said firmly. No more than money. Parker wouldn't give up. Well, I can't take no for an answer. I need a hint. As if out of nowhere, a young salesgirl materialized. No. Sophia shook her head, stuttering with excitement. But her unexpected companion unhesitatingly declared and to tell, and to show, and it would be good to help to decide on the accompanying goods. Well, there are handbags, shoes. In general, you know yourself. And now the lady wants to try on this dress. The sales consultant looked questioningly at Sophia, and she nodded. She was already convinced that Parker knew how to insist. So was it really worth it? Grabbing her dress, Sophia left, for example. And when the colleague came out, he was speechless. Sophia, I'm blown away, Parker said. Is it really so terrible? She smiled. It's not. Just awful. Terrible, beautiful. No, it's a stunning dress. It really looks like it's made on you, the saleswoman said with a smile. I want to offer you these shoes. The girl took out of the box silk, lilac, pink shoes, decorated with bows with decorations. We'll take them from you too. Without giving Sophia a second thought, Thomas said, and you need a treasure too. So Sophia became the happy owner of dress shoes and elegant treasure. Reshed his fancy shimmer and crystals. Parker pulled out his credit card, and despite Sophia's protests, Sophia paid up. So uncomfortable, she slipped in pitifully. Uncomfortable. Thomas interjected. He looked at her strangely. Yeah, and if I offered to take you home in my car, that would be awkward too. And you want to suggest it, said Sophia in a thin voice, and not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I'll insist. And not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I will insist. Then you better say yes right away, she grinned, determined to pay him back for all this splendor at the first opportunity. Right. The colleagues left the hypermarket, not realizing that she was watching them. Cinderella's friend, Sophia. Here is my carriage, Thomas said proudly, opening the door. Parker drove a dark cherry-colored Ford. The car looked brand new. He added, as if reading Sophia's mind, It's beautiful. I like it too, Parker nodded and sighed, asking Sophia, Don't you think something is happening to us? Actually, she didn't think there was anything going on with them. But Sophia was more worried about something else. What to do about it, I don't know, she said quietly. Not true, Parker whispered. Leaning toward Sophia, he gently took the woman's chin and looked into her eyes as if asking her something. Sophia covered her eyes for a moment, as if answering him yes, and in just a second, they broke. Oh, like schoolboys, Parker laughed a few minutes later, and Sophia was in complete agreement with him. Now she felt like a schoolgirl who had kissed for the first time in her life, and now she was afraid that her mom would find out and scold her. Except that it was not only about mom, but also about her husband and daughter. It was about them first of all, though it's unlikely the mom is either. Wendy, despite the contrast with Nick, would approve of her daughter's behavior. And so it was when Parker brought Sophia home. Her husband wasn't with her daughter. That was good for her. It was embarrassing to face them. And the next day, it seemed that everyone in the village knew that Sophia Corver had come home with some guy in a car. She was sitting in her office drinking coffee when her mother called. What the hell are you doing? Going off the deep end? Wendy's on a roll. So Sophia thought doomfully. I think it's starting. If until yesterday she had nothing to hide, now the situation had changed. It's not proper for a married woman to make out in a car with her face. However, it's all yours too. Good morning, Mom, Sophia said calmly. And you are sure that it is good, gargled, and the mother of the whole village only says that you were brought yesterday by car. Well, what's criminal about it? She asked in a friendly manner. What's criminal about it? Yelled Wendy. So the daughter took the phone away from her ear to ride in a car with someone else's man. That sounds normal to you? Mom slowed down and said, Sophia, riding around with another man's man. Maybe it's not normal. Only I did not ride, and came home with a colleague whom I met in the city and who bought you a dress and shoes." Mother interrupted me. "Aren't you ashamed to accept gifts from a man? It makes things more complicated." "It's a loan," she said. The first thing that came to mind, a loan. The old woman asked incredulously. "Yeah, I haven't heard anything about a paycheck yet. And we have a corporate party in 3 days." Sophia lied inspirationally. "We're going to a new restaurant. We're going out with the district administration. So you have to be on your best behavior." "What did I tell you? Your husband doesn't know how to make money. Do you need to be on top of your game right now? And not just at the New Year's Eve party. Why don't you come to the party? It would have been a dime a dozen." "Mom, what's the point of this?" She sighed tiredly. "You know what time he comes?" "Oh, it's been a long time." With annoyance, said Wendy. "I wish you well. Do you? What's in it for me? What do you want?" "I want you to get your husband up to look for a part-time job, or better yet, another job." Sophia laughed, glad that the conversation had moved on to a less sensitive topic. "And where is she in the village?" "That's another job. If only to become a laborer." "You could start your own business," he grumbled. "After all, he's a mathematician. Just knowing math isn't enough. You need an entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't have one." She summed it up triumphantly. What did she have to prove? "You got a worthless man." "Mom, let's figure out our family life on our own sometime." "For probably the 1,000th time," Sophia said. "And anyway, I have to work. So bye." And in the evening, she had a talk with her husband. "Sophia, while Helen is out walking, we need to talk." He didn't waste time with the preface. "Well, we need to, then we need to." "I agree," Sophia nodded, realizing what the conversation would be about. Nick had been ready for a serious conversation since morning, and now he didn't know how to start. Not sure where to start. She assumed, "And I'll get you a paper. You heard that idiotic rumor that I got a ride home from some guy in a foreign car. And now you want to hold me accountable." "Why would you want to hold me accountable?" Peacefully hummed husband. "I just want to understand the situation and understand. We're still a family. Sophia, I've always been honest with you, so I think I can expect the same." "Yes, of course," Sophia nodded. "But I have nothing to repent of. I always thought you were above gossip. I was wrong. And I can't have this conversation," Nick said thoughtfully. And his wife thought that he was probably right. "What's the point of talking about it?" "Nick, there's nothing to talk about," she exclaimed. "He had a ride. I don't deny it. But it wasn't some guy, it was a colleague, the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. I met him by chance at the hypermarket. And he drove me home. That's it. So he went to the village on purpose to take you home." Nick squinted incredulously. "And before that he bought himself an expensive dress and something to go with it." The situation is more serious than Sophia realized. I wonder how much she'll find out later. What if Nick got wind of that kiss in the car? Desperate, she thought to Dawn. The windows were tinted, and the car was far from the parking lot, but still. And who the hell was following me? Sophia ordered herself to be calm. If anyone knew about that kiss, her mother would have mentioned it. Wendy's daughter had kept silent about it. Anyway, calm is only calm. "Oh, we know so much," Sophia shook her head. "But since you have an informant, he should have reported to you that my mysterious admirer bought me this dress on credit." "On credit?" "Yeah, why are you surprised?" "Well, what if you hadn't met him?" "Nick, you should be an interrogator," grinned the wife. "If I hadn't met him, I would have bought a cheaper dress or called someone. There'd be more questions." "Sorry, crushed," muttered Nick. Sophia walked over to her husband and stroked his hair. With a smile, she said, "Let's just forget about it. And let it be the worst thing that happened to us." "I agree," he smiled back and intercepted his wife's hand and kissed it. "I see you have peace, friendship, love," cheerfully said the daughter who came in. "Did you expect us to fight here?" Her mother asked with a grin. "No," Helen shook her head. "It's just nice to see once again that the parents are doing well." The girl undressed and went to her room. "I heard what she said," Sophia said quietly, "so we'll try to fit in." "With tenderness," said her husband. Sophia tried her best to fit in and seemed to succeed. She ignored the general message for the entire 3 days, remaining before the corporate party at the restaurant. Parker, the trips to the district administration with Sophia was entrusted to Jenna, arguing that she was busy, which, however, was true. She answered his calls dryly and one syllable, letting him know that they could only have a business relationship and nothing more. And after the new year, the head will come out of vacation, and everything will be back to normal. Good, Sophia thought with relief. It didn't cost me anything. That's just it. The restaurant, where the corporate party was held, had been opened recently, so it looked untouched and somehow uninhabited. Perhaps it was the high-tech style of the place. Sophia suddenly felt like a snow queen in her ice kingdom. Not to give away, only she guessed that the gossip about her and Parker came from the native village council. And now the co-workers were clearly eager for it to continue. Sophia decided she would not give them that pleasure. She kept talking about her work, had fun, danced, enjoyed delicious food and drinks, and did not give away her desire to approach Parker, and ideally to torture herself with him, and repeat that kiss again and again. "May I invite you gallantly," gave her his hand. Michael, the head of the agriculture department, and Sophia nodded with a smile. Tonight was going to be fun, and Sophia was having fun. She settled into her seat and found herself a cold soda. And 5 minutes later, a security officer came up to her and asked her to dance as well. "Our Sophia is a real hot commodity," commented Cindy, the accountant. "And Parker is not without tears." Her assistant Nina chuckled. The head of the Citizens Affairs Department poured one drink after another, and from time to time cast hateful glances at Sophia. And when the security officer, as befitted a true gentleman, escorted the lady to her seat at the table, Parker approached her with a firm step. The audience froze in anticipation of a dance performance. With forbidding language, he suggested Sophia. "Thomas, are you sure?" She said with a polite smile. "Maybe you should sit down. I decide what's best for me." Parker said, "But we're on a first-name basis." "No," Sophia blurted out, and the almost inferior crowd perked their ears at you. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Michael tried to defuse the situation. It's okay. Who doesn't? A man's had a little too much to drink. It's just an everyday thing. Let's call a cab. But who has a cell phone nearby? An administration employee from a neighboring village readily took out a phone from her purse and started dialing the number of the cab service, and Michael felt it necessary to warn. And without any stupid woman's gossip, I'll rip my tongue out myself. To say the audience was disappointed was to say nothing. The cab arrived 5 minutes later. Parker was escorted to the car and the fun continued. Sophia could physically feel the stares of her colleagues, and after a while she hurriedly turned away, citing the headache. The next day, Parker sent Sophia a message apologizing for her behavior. Apology accepted. Happy New Year. Was it written? Christmas was spent alone with Nick. Wendy went to a sanatorium on a voucher for pensioners, and Helen, having met Christmas and scared in a salad, went to celebrate the holiday in the company of classmates. "You know," said Nick, "I've wanted to celebrate Christmas with you for a long time. But there's always someone else around." Sophia said cheerfully, "Or someone will show up." That New Year's Eve, the Corver couple felt young and hopeful for the first time in a long time. They chatted merrily and had a delicious meal. Ice-cold champagne they recalled carefree youth, the time of the courtship, the wedding, the news of the long-awaited addition to the family, the birth. Knees? Yeah, it was great. Sophia smiled as she sipped her champagne. "Do you remember how you gave me cosmetics and golden balls?" "You bet I do." Her husband laughed. "It was you from Grandma's paratrooper." "Oh, and hit me then." And the old lady, by the way, had a heavy hand. That night, nobody came to see them. Sophia guessed why. But she didn't care about that now. Let them watch their families. Sophia thought, falling asleep in Nick's arms. "I have the coolest husband in the world, and we have a wonderful daughter. The New Year's holidays are relaxing after all." Sophia tried to concentrate on her work, but it was not going well. The same thing seemed to be happening with the other employees. She went to Paulina's office and, with annoyance, noting that she was not there, went to the accounting department. And so it was. together with Irina and Veronica again. They're washing someone's bones, Jenna. I asked you to prepare the certificates this morning, said Sophia. Where are they? I'm leaving in 10 minutes. Are you going to sign for me? Jenna reluctantly got up and went to her office. And the deputy manager saw the car and left. I'll be there soon. When Sophia entered the agriculture department, she ran into Parker there. Oh, Sophia, in my honor, he smiled. How are you? How was the holidays? Thank you. All good. Choppy, Sophia replied. Excuse me. I have to go. Yeah, sure, we'll talk again. Thomas sounded a little too meaningful. She soon realized what the tone meant. The agricultural department in Sofia informed her that she was to be sent to the regional center. For how long? She asked. For 24 hours, answered the head of the department. You will get your daily allowance in the accounting department and come straight to me. Okay, Sophia nodded and left the office. I guess you already know. Thomas entered the office with a smile. What do you mean? And business trips, of course, he shrugged. When Sophia returned to the agricultural department, she learned that she was traveling with Parker. She was terribly tempted to refuse, but under what sauce would she do it? And then, if she refused, it would give the department head some interesting ideas. And Sophia wouldn't want that. She's had enough of the New Year's Eve party. Surely the cuckoos, despite the warnings, were already scratching their tongues. Sophia went on a business trip with Parker. This trip was the beginning of their passionate affair. Both realized there was no point in hiding your feelings under lock and key. And be honest, was this trip in your prayers? Sophia asked, snuggling into his shoulder. But what was I supposed to do? Thomas sighed, pretending to sigh. You were avoiding me. And then there was that stupid corporate party. Drunk like an idiot. Wanted a bloody. What's going to happen now? She said thoughtfully. And everything depends on us. I want to be with you if you become my wife. Then the gossips won't dare say a word. Well, that's true. But Nick? What about Nick? Isn't Nick a little boy who'll get over it? He's not old yet. He'll find someone else. You just shook your head. Sophia. Oh, sweetheart. I've been divorced twice. And as a person with experience, I can say that there's really nothing terrible about it. It's more of a people thing. To me, it's really simple. If the marriage has come to an end, there is no point in saving it, and it is better to try to become happy again. And if there's someone you want to be with, then God knows what to do. You're probably right, she agreed. But you see, I don't have that experience, and it's really hard and uncomfortable for me. I understand, with sympathy, Parker said. Helen is graduating from high school this year, Sophia continued. She's looking forward to graduation and having her mom and dad present together. They are together, being divorced. No, Jen, I'm not ready to make that decision yet. You don't have to, he smiled. Just to be near. And there, as they say, there will be a day, there will be food. Thank you for what? For understanding. Believe me, it's not easy for me, Thomas sighed. But I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. A year passed. On Helen's birthday, all the relatives gathered at the Corver house. If Betty held a grudge against her brother, she prudently kept it to herself. She had come to congratulate her niece, and everything else was none of her business except the relatives and closest family friends. The party was attended by half of her classmates, the celebrant, and 2 friends from the university she had safely entered. Nick and Sophia were only too happy to welcome their daughter's new friends into their hospitable home. From the outside, everything looked the same as before, but only externally. Sophia, I was still seeing Thomas, and every day he got more and more insistent that she should divorce Nick and live with him one day. Parker said, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of this conspiracy. What could she say? Sophia was even worse for leading a double life for a year. What kind of nerves do you have to have? Except that sometimes it seemed to Eugenia that it was easier and easier for her. Sophia exclaimed in amazement. When the lover voiced it, do you think I should lie to the man I love in my own way? Yes, I do. At least as the father of my daughter, it's easier. You think so highly of me. That's when they had their first fight. Thomas apologized for a long time. Her heart shook. Then followed a rather long conversation, during which Sophia decided to tell her husband about the divorce when Lenk turned 18. And so that day came, and Sophia realized with annoyance that she couldn't decide to tell Nick about the divorce. Sophia, but no one pulled you by the tongue. Parker pointed out. Did you make this decision on your own? I don't want to pressure you in any way. But if you don't do what you said you do, I'll start thinking that you don't know how to keep your word. You're right, she said, but I need a little time. How much time is a little time? Thomas squinted. Zen, but we're not in a market. All right, all right. He held up his hands as if in surrender. All right, I'll wait a little longer. I don't know what you're waiting for. Kate, who worked in the registry office, said perplexed. The women had become friends over the year, and Kate was the only person who knew the details of their relationship. She was Thomas's childhood friend, by the way. Sophia was jealous at first, but then she realized there was nothing to fear. If Kate and Thomas didn't have an affair when they were young or even when they were older, it was unlikely to happen at all. What are you waiting for? She repeated. You love him. He loves you. So what's the problem? Thousands of couples marry and divorce. So you're not the first, you're not the last. Nick, that's a shame. What about Helen? Sophia shook her head at her friend. Do you feel sorry for everyone? But the farther into the forest, the more wood. If you want to know, I've never seen Thomas like that. For him, relationships with women have always been a kind of sporting competition. Really, every woman was like a victory for him. And with you, everything changed and Sophia made up her mind. Nick, we need to talk, she said. Her heart was beating like crazy, but there was nowhere to retreat to. At that moment, Nick was feeling the same thing. All this time, he was subconsciously waiting for this conversation. After all, he didn't live on Mars. However, deep down, Nick hoped that it was just an affair. Sonia will outweigh it, and everything will be the same. Turns out, no. Nick, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Yeah, around. I'm leaving. Sophia suddenly felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. Wow, turns out this isn't scary at all. What was I expecting? I can't say I'm happy. But now that you've made up your mind. Nick, you're a wonderful you. Oh, don't do that, he wrinkled his nose. As they say, here's God. And here's the threshold, and there's nothing more to talk about. I'm going tomorrow. Not believing her happiness, said Sophia. As you wish. The next day, she moved into town to Parker's house. Come in, he fussed. We're going to celebrate. I'm not divorced yet. Sophia laughed, but it's only a matter of time. Thomas's apartment was spacious and bright, and looked nothing like a bachelor pad. Everything has been meticulously cleaned, interior cut. The work of a top-notch designer. Please, the host pointed toward the hall, where Sophia was waiting for a sumptuously set table. In the very center stood a goose with apples, and there was an Olivier salad, a salad of shrimp, avocado, and egg bindings with a creamy seafood assortment sauce. Miniature chocolate cakes with whipped cream. What restaurant did you order from? Sophia asked. What restaurant? Pretend. Thomas was indignant. With the exception of the cakes, I made everything myself. My favorite woman moved in. Good girl. She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. So what are we waiting for? I'm hungry like a wolf. What will you have? Wine, cognac, champagne. Well, I'll have a whiskey, said Parker, and the lovers began their meal. How delicious, Sophia said with admiration, tasting the sleeve salad. It's from Italian cuisine. I like it very much too. Do you know what my dream is? Asked Thomas after the second toast, which was to love. And what's that? To meet your daughter. Sophia's soul was singing. Today she called Helen and informed her of the impending divorce. To her great relief, her daughter was very understanding. I'll introduce you, Sophia promised. For the second time in the last 24 hours, she was surprised at how simple everything was. But unfortunately, it wasn't. After the divorce, Nick became addicted to alcohol. At first, he'd have a drink or two after work. But as time went on, things took a serious turn. One day, Nick showed up at school with a bad hangover, for which he was sharply reprimanded by the principal. The mathematician apologized and said it wouldn't happen again. Kelly, he's not really drunk. The vice principal stood up for him. At least the man had some drama in his personal life. Who doesn't? The principal grinned. Even for students was not a secret that Molly has long been unevenly breathing to the math teacher. And here was such an opportunity to win the man of her dreams. And to say the vice principal had been a widow for 6 years. All right, Kelly relented. On your, Molly, responsibility. But if this happens again, I'm gonna have to talk to you differently, Nick. I hope you understand what I mean. I do, replied the mathematician briefly. Well and good. Let's get on with our work. The incident never happened again. And a couple of months later, after a corporate birthday party, they decided to continue the banquet at Nick's. The cell phone was ringing off the hook, and Alex, the gym teacher, exclaimed in anger, "Yours, that's the one." With annoyance nodded Alex. So calmed down. To hell with her. Alex, you're 100% wrong, said Nick. Do you know what this is called? What do we have? We don't keep it when we lose it. Oh, poor or what? Colleagues drank a shot each, and the gym teacher remarked, but freedom. Fuck that freedom. Nick said with tears in his voice. When I see Sofiaka coming to work with his whip, I'm ready to kill him. And why him? Alex grinned. There, I think your mother-in-law did her best. And ours was talking to the whole village about how worthless he was. But apparently her words fell on fertile ground. The coworker left, and Nick continued his outpourings in proud solitude. Alex's words about his mother-in-law's contribution to the divorce did not go out of his head, and he went to his ex-mother-in-law's house drunk and made a scandal. It's all your fault, you old witch, he yelled, flashing his eyes. Why? Wendy said nonchalantly. 3. You always said I was worthless. That said, confirmed the older woman. Wasn't she? And Nick couldn't keep a woman. So it's the mother-in-law's fault. Well done. I'm you old witch, threateningly said the former son-in-law and approached Wendy. Help, they're killing me. She paid with a voice not her own and ran out of the house. Nick, what are you doing? Shouted Betty, who came over. The neighbor told her that a drunken Nick had gone to his ex-mother-in-law's house. And the woman followed, just as long as he didn't do anything. I'll get her now, yelled the math teacher. I'll go to the district police officer. The old woman continued to yell, and such a person teaches children at school. Ah, disgusting. Fucking alcoholic. You can be sure I won't let it go. Wendy, honey, I'm so sorry, for God's sake. Betty begged her tearfully. You understand. I'll get on my knees to you, but don't go to the police station. To hell with you. The old woman came in with her and, cautiously squinting at her brother-in-law, went into the house, and Betty took her brother home, exhorting him that life doesn't end after divorce. I love her. Nick interjected to his sister. You know I love her. Betty just sighed heavily and thought, and they say women are stupid. A few days later, the story reached the education department, and the question of firing the mathematician arose. Colleagues were divided into those who argued that such behavior is completely unacceptable for a teacher and those who supported Nick. By the way, Sophia, feeling guilty before the former spouse, stood up in his defense. She tried by all means to persuade the education officer not to use such drastic measures. But alas, as a result, Nick was left without a job. He'll be lost, Sophia lamented. Don't exaggerate, replied Thomas. After all, he is a grown man, an intellectual. I think he will pull himself together in time. Oh, I don't know. I sighed. You know what she was thinking. Just promise me you won't take it personally. I get scared when you talk like that, Parker admitted. Yes, and it's really not a big deal. Anyway, maybe it makes sense to postpone the wedding. Why would I do that? I don't see any joy in that. Sophia's on. Yeah, I've been living like a hot frying pan. I'm probably the only lazy person who doesn't say behind my back, I've driven a man crazy. And they don't give a rat's ass about me trying to help him. And I still got a job to do, by the way. Well, the job isn't exactly a problem, Thomas said. There's a specialist in the civil registry office about to retire. Why? Will you look for a good option and work? Kate didn't tell me anything about that, she wondered. But you would. When was the last time you saw each other? About a couple weeks ago, Sophia recalled. But you see, the position's only been open for a week. I think we should hold off on the wedding after all. But think about it. Nick is in this situation, and I'm getting married. And you're like salt in the wound. Zen, but after all, we're living together. Well, okay, whatever you say, Harker gave in. In the end, they decided to postpone the wedding for a month. Nick felt empty and cold. His parents had passed away one by one many years ago. The wife he loved and idolized had left him for someone else. The daughter was studying to be a journalist in a regional city, and Nick was clear that Helen would not return to her native village. What with her profession here to do? With a sigh, he thought, except to visit. And now he didn't have a job either. Nick called his daughter almost every day, and Helen supported her father as best she could. She said that the divorce was not the end of life, and that Nick would still find happiness. In general, everything they usually say in such cases. If you want to come to my place, the daughter said. I'm working part-time now and renting an apartment. No, really, the only other person who supported him in any way was his sister Betty. You should come more often, she said. Why do you have to sit alone? Nick nodded uncertainly. What? Yeah, shouted the sister. Have you eaten at all today? I don't remember. He doesn't remember. But he remembered to get a bottle. Nick, but what are you turning into? The woman said in despair. Listen, why don't you stay with us? You'll come to your senses, and then we'll see what to do with you. Maybe we can find you a job. And Nick, Betty, he said quietly. Leave me alone. I'm sick enough as it is. The sister thought for a moment and walked out with a sigh. She walked home and thought about how easy it was to break something that had taken years to build up. Unlike her friend Anna, Betty was far from judging her former sister-in-law. But how painful it was to see past and washed-up addition Sophia while Nick trivialized. Betty approached the house and saw Anna sitting on a bench. Hi, her friend said with a smile. I'm here to see you. Well, hello, sighed Betty and invited Anna into the house. The women came into the kitchen and the hostess offered them tea. What tea is there? Betty waved it off. There's a lot going on here. And how can it be without special interest? Betty asked. Frankly speaking, she had enough of what was going on in their family. I heard the latest news was righteous anger, exclaimed Anna. Your ex was transferred to the civil registry office. In my opinion, quite logically shrugged the landlady. After all, she lives in the city, and most likely it is inconvenient for her to go to work in the village. But for me, it's much simpler. She just had a guilty conscience, her friend declared triumphantly. So what's the matter? Betty grinned. So she has one. And I'll tell you something else. She postponed the wedding because of what happened to the can. But what a noble thing to do, huh? Anna shook her hands. Yes, they are without a stamp in the passport. They have been married for more than a year, and they live together. Not a big sacrifice. Betty suddenly felt incredibly disgusted. It felt like someone had tainted the air in the house. And you know what, Anne? After a little silence, she said, Go away. She was stunned. I don't get it. Are you defending her or something? Well, Betty didn't expect it. I mean, Nick is your brother Nick's brother. Not only am I his sister, but I'm also a woman. And as a woman, I understand Sophia. Maybe it's not love at all. But right now, at this moment, the pig is attracted to this man. Judgment. Who are we? Life will judge us. You go away. Nick kept drinking. Now he was living on the principle that a day had passed and it was all right. That's how it is. The villagers said. What a good family they had, eh? You can't be sure of anything. It seemed that it couldn't get any worse. But the worst was ahead. Nick, a former non-smoker, picked up the habit. And then one day, what Betty had feared would happen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The young woman, as if anticipating trouble, sat on the terrace and sold not cheerful thoughts. And when Betty smelled smoke, she realized with some sixth sense that Nick's house was on fire. She went to the wicket from where the house where her brother lived was clearly visible and made sure that her hunch was correct. Fire. At the top of her voice wailed Betty and skipped to Nick on the move dialing the emergency number. When Betty ran up to her brother's house, the fire was slowly but surely growing. Without thinking, the woman kicked the door open with her foot. She ran into the house, where she got the strength from. She wet a rag and sold into her brother's bedroom and began to shake him. "Wake up, you idiot," screamed Betty. "Is your house on fire?" Sister forcefully pushed Nick and beckoned him toward the exit. The woman realized that every second counted another tug, and they were outside and just in time to fall to the grass. Betty saw the ceiling collapse. Before she lost consciousness, she thought she had made it just in time. People were running from all sides. The house where Nick had been happy for almost 20 years was extinguished quickly. But to restore it required a lot of money, which he didn't have. In fact, it was not even a question of restoration, but almost a full-fledged construction. Nick moved in with his sister. Michael helped them with household chores, planted potatoes, and willingly helped the children to do their homework. The youngest from the bench had a math problem. Nick stopped drinking. The house Betty lived in with her husband and 2 sons wasn't that big. So Nick couldn't help but realize that he had to come up with a place to live. But what could he think of? The village council only shook their hands, for there were no empty houses in the village. One day, Nick heard Michael ask his wife if he was moving at all. If he'd gone on a shift, it would have been good for him. "We're not millionaires." He felt bad about embarrassing his sister and brother-in-law. That's why Nick thought it was a good idea. Except there was no money on the phone to go online, Betty. "I hate to ask you for anything, but could you spare some for a poor hobo?" 300, he asked his sister. Nick had been calling himself a hobo lately, either jokingly or seriously. "What's that for?" With suspicion, Betty asked, "And has your brother been drinking?" "Don't worry, you're past that." Nick assured her with a grin. "I want to look for a job ad." "How long do I have to sit on your neck?" "Well, I'll get it for you." A couple days later, he found an ad for shift workers. "When are you leaving?" Betty asked. "In a week." Nick called his daughter before he left. "I'm happy for you," Helen exclaimed. "I've been having all kinds of bad thoughts lately, but thank God you're okay. I should come visit you sometime. What do you think?" "We'll see," the father replied evasively. Nick was ashamed to admit to his daughter that the house where she spent her childhood was no longer there. The ex-wife apparently didn't know anything about it either. After all, Sophia now worked in the city and did not maintain relations with any of the villagers. Thomas and Sophia were 3 days away from getting married. "I can't wait for you to say yes to me in the face of the law," said the happy groom. The future spouses were having lunch at the very cafe where they had met at the hardware meeting. The faces of the bride and groom were shining and the people around them were smiling. "I look at you and directly infect with good mood," said the former to them Lola, head of the Department of Media Relations. "Are you so cool?" "Thank you for your kind words," smiled Parker. The daughter arrived the evening before the wedding of moms. "You could put your face on the cover," Helen exclaimed, kissing her mother. "You look like $1,000,000. "1 million?" Sophia smiled embarrassedly. "Right. Why am I being petty for $1 million? Oh, come on." With a laugh, she waved her daughter away. "You are not hungry." "I could eat an elephant," cheerfully admitted Helen. "But I can't promise an elephant." Sophia hummed. "But fried chicken, and I'll feed you. Come on," encouraged the girl. "Almost a year of studenthood. I gave her a lot of fried chicken, but such a delicious Tina, as my mother, has not yet met." I hope the groom appreciated. By the way, where did he appreciate it? Did he appreciate it at the bachelor party now? Mother smiled. He, like you, was not afraid to let go. What about the cake stripper and other bachelor party trappings? You know, not afraid. I don't think our Thomas Stepanovich can be surprised by strippers anymore, or anything else for that matter. I'm very glad I got him for goulash. What about Daddy's sadness? Helen asked. It always seemed to me that you loved each other so much that there is no stronger. It did not seem. The daughter answered Sophia seriously. That's the way it was. But I guess our love just ran out of steam. It happens like that too. But I am grateful to Vanya that he was in my life. By the way, you called him a long time ago. The other day. How is he? He seems to be doing well. He's away on a shift. Oh well, God forbid he's doing well. There's a very nice woman coming, and we'll drink to that. Winked Sophia, the daughter's bachelorette party. Helen smiled understandingly. Or else. Mother and daughter laughed amicably. And then Kate showed up. The bachelorette party was a success. The next day, Thomas and Sophia became husband and wife. Wendy looked at her daughter under her dress with a concentrated frown. One could only wonder what grievances she would express to her new son-in-law. Nick returned from his shift a month later with a lot of money and a great mood. It would be better to solve the problem with housing. The tramp had arrived. He announced his arrival. Fresher, better looking, Sister said approvingly. The work has done you good. Very much so. I'll have to do something about the house. There'll be daylight. There'll be food. The housing problem solved itself. And not just housing. In the morning, Nick went fishing in the neighboring village. The fish pecked and not bad. And Corver learning to cook, which Betty was a great master. But the stars had prepared something more interesting for Nick. He pulled the rod, but it was obviously caught on something. Shit. Nick cursed and bent his lice and fell into the water. He surfaced. And headed for the shore, pulling the fish boat up behind him. Nick was walking through the village, soaking wet, and carrying a bag with a still living fish in it. But there was no cell phone in his pocket. Drowned in the river, and Nick, he heard a woman's voice. What are you doing here? Molly? Nick exclaimed in surprise. Unexpected. Yes, I came to go fishing. In fact, in their meeting, by and large, there was nothing unexpected. He knew that the head teacher had a mother living in the village. And yet, how did you manage to get so far away? Molly asked. The boat overturned. With a smile, he answered. And the former colleagues could not help laughing. That's what the amateur fishermen, said coworkers. And went to my place before the bust is still more than 3 hours. And it is cool outside. And it's comfortable enough. There was no one in the house except Molly. The head teacher gave him a t-shirt and a tracksuit, not forgetting to put the kettle on. I believe your mother lives here too. Nick showed his knowledge. She did, sighed her colleague. Mom died. 9 days yesterday. She came here to sort out her things. But what to do with the house? I don't know. My mom was very sick, and just before she left, she gave me a deed of gift. So they're thinking of selling it or keeping it for Ethan. The guy wanted to get married. At least he'd have a place to bring his wife. Ethan was Molly's son. He was a year older than Helen and went to Polytechnic. Would you let the tramp stay here? Nick asked. What vagrant? The mistress of the housemaid. Sadly, he replied. You know probably that I'm having dinner at my sister's, but I'm tired of embarrassing them. Don't worry, I'll pay. Yesterday I came back from a shift. I make good money. And then I'll find a place to live. What money? Molly waved her hands. You can live, of course, as long as you need. Was it a nice house? A big one with 2 vegetable gardens, a garage, outbuildings, and a nice garden. Nick took good care of the house, for which Molly was very grateful. Another question is who should thank whom? Nick grinned. When the landlady told him to thank you, she took in a hobo. Well, what kind of tramp are you? Molly objected. Just a man in temporary difficulty. She visited the mother house almost every day. Both the residents and the child began to guess what was the matter. A fiancé had shown up. Why are you, Molly, frequenting the village? One day the sales clerk remarked. I wonder if you're going to move there. Who knows? The widow smiled enigmatically. And when the villagers found out who was staying with her, everything fell into place. But Nick made no move to get closer. The coworkers began to speak to each other. But it didn't go any further than that. Molly realized that her lodgers needed time. After all, the man had recently gone through a difficult divorce. It was all settled on Christmas Eve. Molly's back from corporate. Beautiful, dressed up, new haircut. You look good. Approvingly, Nick said. That hair looks really good on you. All the men must have craned their necks. Maybe, she smiled. But it doesn't make any difference to me. And who's going to wring the neck of a drunkard who's old enough to be my son? Well, there is also a physicist, sneered Corver. True, I think so. doesn't distinguish a man from a woman anymore. Well, you see, Molly waved her hands and laughed merrily. Well, I think that women are always pleased with a man's attention. You like ears, do you? The widow asked quietly, looking Nick in the eye. I love with my heart, he whispered back. The heart of the woman, tired of loneliness, anxiously went down. Did it mean that Nick's heart was not free and it still belonged to Sophia? And yet there was still a tiny hope. The best counselor is the heart, Nick continued, catching her gaze. Now they were looking at each other. Molly suddenly realized she had a chance. Nick nestled against the woman's warm cheek, and he physically felt his heart thaw. And when their lips met, the man realized he was finally cured and ready to start life anew. You are very beautiful, Nick whispered, hardly tearing himself away from her cop. Molly only smiled. She wished if Nick told her that, then things would work out for them. Nick and Molly spent that Christmas alone together. They didn't need anyone. They talked about everything in the world, made plans, and they had the best time of their lives. How you celebrate Christmas is how you spend it, Nick said with a smile, pouring the rest of the champagne. So don't get your hopes up. It's easy to get rid of me, at least for the next year. Outside the window, it was already starting to get matchmaking. And the lovers were thrilled to see not only the coming year together, but also the dawn. Both saw it as a good omen. Could it have been any different on this magical night? I hope it doesn't happen in the next 20 years. Molly said quietly, snuggling into his shoulder. Well, that's a bit pessimistic. Nick stretched out with courtly disappointment. Here's the 30 thing. Molly, well, marry me. I realize I have nothing to offer you yet, but I promise it's only a matter of time. I have grand plans for this year, and shut up, Molly whispered, placing her fingers on his lips. If you were a beggar, I'd still say yes. I'm not a beggar. It's just him. I'm a tramp. My favorite tramp. To us, to our happiness. They drank champagne and went to bed. In the afternoon, a blizzard broke out. Nick shook his head sweetly. Shall we shovel the snow? And why do you want to yawn on a holiday? Asked Molly. My joy. It's only half an hour's work. Then it's gonna snow even more. And then you and I will have a drink. Some wine. Nick went out into the yard and took a shovel, as suddenly he saw how the ambulance, which had left from the side of the cabins, drove into a snowdrift and began to tow frantically. The driver got out of the cab and started looking around nervously. The doctor followed him out, and the men began to gesticulate frantically. Nick picked up a shovel and rushed to the car, which was about 200 meters away. Men. Do you need help? He asked, out of breath. How else? Exclaimed the doctor. There's an elderly woman with a stroke. We can't bring the old lady. The driver got into the car. Nick started shoveling, and the doctor tried to push the car out. Damn this blizzard. He cursed in his monologue with an expletive. The doctor pushed open the door of the patient compartment. Nick peered inside, and his hair stood on end. On the couch lay his ex-mother-in-law. Her mouth was curved to the left. One eye was closed, the other staring blankly into space. A nurse sat next to the older woman. Wendy blurted out to Nick. Do you know her? Asked the doctor. I do, exhaled Corver. And who is she to you? How's that? Do you have any contact with your ex-wife? No, shook his head Nick. I changed my cell phone not too long ago, but also. And the son, spat the doctor contemptuously. Drunk and sneaking around, I think he'll wake up and not remember that his mother was taken to the hospital, and he flatly refused to accompany. I can tell the daughter. It dawned on him the only number Nick remembered by heart. It was Helen's number. Notified, the doctor asked, and Corver suddenly thought he might not be able to reach his daughter. It's Christmas after all. Young people are out. Can I go with her? Unexpectedly, Nick volunteered. Yes, please. The medic shrugged. The driver continued to slip, and the car moved off. Thanks, buddy, shouted the driver Nick, and the doctor asked if he had changed his mind about accompanying the patient. Fortunately, his cell phone was in his pocket. He told Molly what had happened and asked her to go get a shovel. Nick's fears about Helen were justified. He didn't manage to get through to his daughter until the evening. God, what a horror. the girl exclaimed. And Mom is in Thailand with Dad Thomas. They'll be back in a week, but I can come. Come, daughter, but here's the thing, he hesitated. Anyway, I'm living in the village now. What are you doing there? Helen was stunned. Daughter, I'll see you later. Write down the address. After talking to her father, Helen was discouraged. What's so strange, though? Her father was able to find a woman and go to her in the village, and they spent Christmas together. This could only make Helen happy. Dad had found the strength to start a new life. He loves, is loved, and as a consequence, is happy. What more could a daughter want? Yes, but Dad said he was living there. Why not at his place? I'll come and see everything with my own eyes. Dad sounds like he's doing well, and if it's as good as I think it is, it's great. With a positive thought, Helen fell asleep. Helen managed to get a ticket only for January 4. The village was almost no different from her native village. Even the store building looked exactly the same as it had with the baby. The house where Helen's father now lived she found quickly. She knocked on the door not boldly and heard a vaguely familiar female voice. Come in. It's not locked. When the girl entered, she was stunned. Molly. Helen exclaimed in surprise when she saw the head teacher. Yes, Molly, said the woman, embarrassed. That's the way it is. Where's Daddy? Is Daddy coming? There was an awkward pause. And Helen. Nick shouted joyfully and kissed his daughter on both cheeks. Daddy is touched, said the girl, hugging her father. I missed you so much. Me too, Nick admitted. Tears also appeared in the man's eyes. But thank God, you are here. And please come to the table. And yes, guys, let's go to the table. Having coped, finally, with indignation, cordially invited Molly. Dad, Molly, so are you together? With a smile asked Helen. Yes, simply replied Nick. I hope you two are friends. I'm thrilled, assured her daughter. I have 4 parents now, you might say. Sorry, stupid joke. But why? A silly one that doesn't agree with their father's choice. I, for one, am very pleased. After the first glasses were knocked back and the first hunger was removed, Nick and his daughter started talking about everyday life. How's Grandma doing? Helen inquired. Grandma will now need a nurse and a wheelchair. With a sigh, the father replied. But even that's not the point. Sashka and his heroines don't want to take Wendy away. And why? Because they're assholes. Nick cut him off. Besides, Uncle, as you know, always liked to drink. What a sick mother. And if his son doesn't need her, what about his Natasha? What kind of horror stories are you telling? Helen shuddered, and this daughter is not horrors, but the harsh truth of life, philosophically remarked the father. I hope I don't suffer the same fate in my old age. No, of course not. Wendy was conscious and already knew that if it hadn't been for her ex-son-in-law, there was no telling how things would have ended. For 2 days, my ex-mother-in-law barely spoke about me. I mean, he saved my life. And I'm fine. Wendy? Nick smiled, squeezing her hand. The main thing is that you get better. Where's Sophia? Asked the older woman. And tears appeared in her eyes. She doesn't ask about Sasha. A thought crossed my mind. So she realizes that her son doesn't need her. Sophia has gone on vacation. How will she come back? She'll be back. She already knows everything. Really, her son-in-law reassured her. A nurse came into the room and said that the patient needed to rest. Yes, of course, nodded Nick, and walked out. He visited Wendy every day, fed the old lady from a spoon, wiped down Molly's cooking, and ducked out after her without complaint. You're a good man, the ex-mother-in-law said. And Nick smiled involuntarily. If a year ago someone had told Nick that his ex-mother-in-law would say those words, he would have twisted his finger at his temple. What was a year? A week. Nick was pleased to note that Wendy was on the mend. Her speech was no longer so frozen, but her leg paralysis was. As the doctor had assured her, was a matter of time. It was not only the doctor's merit, Molly assured her. A kind word is good for the cat. I think Wendy's quarrelsome nature was a kind of defensive reaction. But I think things are going to change now. Love and kindness works wonders. Hearing these words, Nick remembered what his future spouse had said. It looks like that's the way it's going to be. His Molly is rarely wrong at all. You're a very good man, Wendy repeated. Well, I'm flattered, Nick replied. Sentimental impulses. A few days later, Wendy was discharged. A couple of days before the discharge, Nick called his ex-wife, and Sophia assured him that she would take her mother back to her house. Admittedly, honestly, Corver was dreading this conversation. He himself could not understand the reason for his fear, but the fact remained. When Nick heard the voice of his ex-wife, he was surprised that he was absolutely not excited. They had a very nice conversation, and Nick even told his ex-wife that he would soon get married. Well done, Sophia said approvingly. I hope it's a worthy woman. You bet she is. I know her, the ex-wife inquired. You know, answered Nick with a grin. Molly, the vice principal. Oh, come on. Well, congratulations. You're gonna invite me to the wedding. Well, why not? The former spouses warmly said goodbye, and Nick felt as a mountain fell off his shoulders. Why, I wondered, was he afraid? As Parker gently coaxed his mother-in-law into the car. Wendy, are you comfortable? I'm fine, replied the old woman, and suddenly said, you know what I just thought about, and what is it? Nick, who was sitting in the front seat, asked, that both my sons-in-law are good people. Sonia has good taste after all. Both sons-in-law, as if on command, laughed deafeningly. Molly, who was sitting next to Wendy, also smiled. We try, Thomas said cheerfully and started the car. And waiting for her at home were her daughter, granddaughter, and a holiday dinner. 3 years later, a few days before the defense of the diploma, Helen felt indisposed. Everything pointed to the fact that the future journalist is in an interesting position. When the test showed 2 stripes, Helen cried. What are we crying about? He asked. After all, we wanted to get married. So the 3 of us are going to get married. That's all. Are you really happy? I'm really happy. 4 parents. What did Helen jokingly call them? They were happy too, and Wendy had nothing to talk about. So I'm going to be a great-grandmother, she smiled. Yes, nodded her daughter. Oh my God, I'm going to be a grandmother. That's so exciting. It's like a baby boom, Nick said when he found out he was going to be a grandfather. A year ago, he became a father for the 2nd time. Almost all the money he earned on his regular shift was spent on Echo. And in the end, Nick and Molly became parents to an adorable little dumpling. So the baby-to-be has an aunt who's only 2 years older than him, or a little less. Nick led the eldest daughter to the altar, where the groom was waiting for her and thought what a lucky man he was. And Sophia, Molly, and Thomas were thinking in unison that one should not be afraid of change. Change isn't always a bad thing. They knew that.
Subscribe and click the bell. Behind this psychiatric clinic in the city, and in general in the region, have long been bad rumors, like what happens in horror movies, and Michael had certainly heard about it. And when his mother and grandmother found out that he is an excellent student, and a graduate of medical school goes there to work as an orderly, one of them waved his hands. Grandson, you're the only man left in the family. Don't go there. Michael, you know I'm from an ancient noble family. I may not have 1 million, but I'll find the money to pay for your internship abroad. Grandma, what money? What abroad? I have to make my own way, just like my grandfather. And the boy nodded his head at the portrait of his grandfather hanging on the wall. And indeed, Michael had someone to look up to. His grandfather was a famous surgeon, and his father, who died in Afghanistan, blew himself up on a mine, saving the military. And so he decided to become a doctor, but not a surgeon like his grandfather and father, but a psychiatrist. Why psychiatry? My mother joked in the first year of school, but Mom, if the body my grandfather and father studied, so to speak, in detail, then psychiatry is a real field. For research, a Klondike. Yes, you're a researcher. I hope. Psychiatry isn't contagious. Oh, Mom, don't worry. It's not like it's the flu or anything. Maybe I can find my own unique method of therapy for mentally ill patients. Yeah, and bring people like Chikatilo back into society. So Adriana, Please don't bring it up, said the grandmother, stepping in for her grandson. The case of this serial maniac was then on the rumor, and the whole country was following him. But the mother reacted too painfully to her. Michael understood her because her own sister Adriana, and his own aunt, the only close person, killed by an unknown assailant, and the culprit was never found. The investigator then said that it could be a maniac, but now in many women saw negative elements of society, especially if they stayed in such institutions as their own city institution for the mentally ill. Mom, you are an adult, and you understand that it is better to treat such people, recognize them as sane, and then pass a sentence, than to spend money on them to keep them in such houses as ours for years. And you're still defending him. The mother was outraged, but she knew her son's temper. Michael, you're just like your father, just as stubborn. All right, but don't complain to me about anything. Adriana, don't worry. My grandson will complain to his legal grandmother. You mean me? Betty gently ruffled the thick red curls of his favorite grandson. Grandma, but I'm not a boy anymore. Not a boy, but not yet a husband. So listen to your mother, but also to me sometimes. So they lived in the old Tsar's house, where they had a 5-room apartment with its own fireplace and a large library, luxurious balconies, which still kept traces of the old stucco. This house was in the very center of the city, stood on a small hill, and was considered one of the elite in the city. For it, even many rich men and millionaires, even one criminal. Authority gave crazy money for the family to sell their apartment. No way, said Betty's grandmother, who was considered the head of the family and whose word was final. This apartment will serve my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So just stop asking me stupid questions like if I want to sell the apartment and leave me alone. That's all she said a few years ago to a city criminal mastermind. And strangely enough, but after that they really didn't bother them anymore. They didn't even start organizing invasion raids, as it often happened in those times. That's how they lived. Michael, dreaming of becoming a famous psychiatrist, and his mother and grandmother, whom he madly loved and idolized. No, there were girls in his life, and even an older woman, but he loved few. Yes, there was a crush, even a feeling like love, but nothing serious. He went on studying, falling in love, dating. Now he was interning at a psychiatric clinic in their town. Yes, they had talked the most horrible and heartbreaking, up to the fact that their orderlies and doctors have fun with mentally ill beauty. But no one could prove it. What do you want me to do? Michael asked his old friend Benjamin, who told him all this. Do. I really have to go over the border, as my grandmother says. But you know, you'd have to sell the last of it. And what would I do in that prosperous Europe? And you realize their methods and ours are probably incompatible. So that's where it stands. I'm already used to the realities of our medicine and psychiatry, in particular, as well as methods of therapy. What's a handful of pills? I'd rather have a shot in the vein, or even for some freaks in general. Orbital lobotomy. You're a bloodthirsty. Benjamin, I'm way ahead of you. Aha. That's why I went into dentistry, so I could yank my patient's teeth with a vengeance. And the guy was soon making a grimace that made them both laugh. A healthy laugh. Crooked faces like first graders. It was normal. In their practice, doctors, they are such and black humor that help them endure the specifics and difficulties of the job. Often the lack of weekends, when there is no one on shifts. And you do all the work for 3 people, so you cannot die long, or even go crazy and become like his future charges patients in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah, Ethan, I probably should have chosen dentistry like you, and my grandmother insisted that my senior year I choose dentistry or gynecology. But that's just not my thing, you know. I see, Michael. Then you'll have to go to me for dental care and one of our girls for gynecology. I'll give you a headache. All right, buddy, I gotta go home. I gotta get ready for my first day of private dentistry tomorrow. I'm on the phone for now. Michael nodded, and after shaking hands, They parted ways. He had to go to his mental hospital tomorrow. Then, it was worth it to come home early, to pack a bag, and for once, not to sit in front of the TV until night, to sleep. Already at home he had dinner and brewed himself a fragrant tea. Michael sat down at the computer, an old computer brought from Europe, but still capable of much computer brought to him under the order from a friend of his grandmother for his birthday. When Michael was in his second year of study, and the guy's joy was unbounded. Grandma, this is a real treasure. Luckily, the guy had no limit. And now he sat down at the computer, started the system, and connected the internet. Yeah, the internet is power. The ability to communicate with the world, to learn a lot. And now he decided to keep his own electronic diary of his internship at work, including everything he saw and heard, what methods were used, and what the doctors achieved. Maybe I'll even write a dissertation based on this diary. Not many secrets this asylum hides. Is this your institution for the mentally ill? Grandma came into the room and put a tray with a huge tea and sweet spoons on the table. Yes, Grandma, I'm thinking of keeping a diary. Maybe I'll see something interesting, and there are strange things going on in your almshouse. Grandma, do you know something? Tell me, please. I know something. Betty sat down on her grandson's bed and thought about it. That sometimes I see girls and young women in weird outfits, but they also have ribbons in their hair. Grandma, well, the outfits are ordinary, hospital outfits. Maybe some suits came from humanitarian aid. And the ribbons? Maybe one of the nurses got sick. No, grandson, something else. Outfits. Grandma thought for a moment, and then said, you know, like in adult movies, a dress, short stockings, and netting. Somehow the guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Strangely, he had passed by this place many times, but he hadn't really paid attention to the patients. His grandmother, on the other hand, did. She looked at her grandson carefully and then continued. And about the ribbons, you know, they're weird too. How can I explain it to you? Well, what caught your attention? Just tell me the first thing you noticed. The guy felt like a detective, but he was already wondering what his astute grandmother had seen. Betty pressed her lips together and then gave out. They're red with glitter. So what? Grandma, it's bright and beautiful. I guess crazy people like that. I don't know about that. You know, in my time, so to speak, pre-revolutionary ribbons like this were stuffed in the hair of girls of easy virtue in brothels. And here, they'd walk around like that, and they'd be highlighted with ribbons, so to speak. It's not human. You shouldn't make the poor and disadvantaged look like the poor and disadvantaged. Ugh. And also such ribbons flew hair only young and beautiful. Grandma, you're my Agatha Christie. Really, how many times have I walked by it and just not paid attention? It's impossible not to pay attention to such an inferential outfit. All right. Well, I take what you said, and I'll pay attention. Maybe I'll uncover some kind of world conspiracy. And the guy smiled his beautiful smile, but he didn't know how close he was to the truth. This hospital was a place for the mildly insane. As the doctors would say, those who didn't require enhanced confinement. That's why the patients could walk by themselves in the equipped yard of the institution, awarded with a fence. But the guy would learn about it later, when he would encounter the most horrible and disgusting thing that could happen in his professional life. Monday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and similar, especially after a night of threatening rain and rain that walled the city. Yes, Michael thought, waking up in the night and looking out the window to rain like that could wash away the whole city and my psychotic charges with it. But the morning was clear and sunny, and there was practically nothing left from the traces of rain, except for broken branches and leaves on the ground. Yeah, it's a lot of work for a janitor, the boy said aloud. That's right, said the janitor of the Czech grandmother Sophia, who has been cleaning the yard. Since 5 o'clock, she's already cleaned so much, and still waving and waving the broom. Good luck to you." And the guy, throwing his backpack on his shoulder, went to his new place of practice. On the approach to the psychiatric clinic, the guy decided to walk around it a bit, on the other side, so that he could see the place where their patients usually strolled, and to pay attention to what his grandmother was talking about yesterday. Indeed, there were several girls walking in the courtyard, dressed in very revealing outfits with brightly colored ribbons in their hair. But the strangest thing was not only the orderlies, but also the head doctor and his 2 deputies were standing aside. They looked at their charges and smilingly discussed something. And the head doctor was looking at Kathy, a new patient who had been brought in a few days ago, a victim of hypnosis, or rather a failed experiment of a psychopath, a doctor who practiced his trance technique on her. Yeah, the guy thought. Such things happen in the practice of doctors. As the grief doctor told the law enforcers, this method he tried to muffle her inner hunger. What kind of hunger? One of the investigators asked the doctor. Sexual hunger. She was just obsessed with men, always wanting sex. I tried to bring her back to a normal life, although so far I had to cure her with this method by my refinement, to cure her. Or maybe it was just you decorating her like that. I was saving her from herself. The doctor was sure he was doing good. But, as Michael thought to himself, having heard the girl's story and the doctor's testimony, he was no less crazy than his victim, whom he had turned into a vegetable. Yes, thought the new orderly from one prison, or rather office, psycho, experimenter to the clinic. Or rather, a study, a psycho, an experimenter in a clinic where she was looked upon as a subject of pleasures and possible molestation. Well, if you've got your eye on her, I'm gonna have to keep an eye on you, Kathy. Now I realize my grandmother was right about something. You don't dress patients like that. This isn't a catwalk, it's a clinic. Michael took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked, even though he'd only dabbled before. As his downstairs neighbor, Uncle Benjamin, who'd been in the camps for years, would say. He was translating product, also a colorful type. The guy remembered about him. But in reality, as he was an Urka and a political prisoner in the past owned such a 3-room apartment. Michael even once asked him jokingly, "Who will get your chambers in Jacuzzi?" To which he replied, "Squint your eyes at him. Don't be jealous. I won this house with my teeth." And the neighbor showed his not too healthy strong teeth. "Don't look at my teeth. I can still do a lot. And the apartment is my mother's inheritance, not the state's. Believe me." "Uncle Benjamin, but you don't have children." "Who told you I don't? I had a daughter, but she died in childbirth. So there's only one beloved grandson. But why doesn't he visit you? Where is he? Do you even know?" "Because he lives abroad. My daughter married an Arab. She fell in love and went to the Emirates. To tell the truth, she lived like a cheese in butter. I wouldn't give her that. But I guess you have to pay for everything. And I guess she paid the price when she gave birth. I'm sorry, Uncle Benjamin, I really didn't know." "Hold on. There's a grandson. Have you even seen him?" "Yes, he came to my daughter's funeral. To her grave, to be exact. She converted to Islam and was buried on the day she died. So I only got the grave. I'm sorry." "You're welcome. My grandson's growing up and my daughter's husband calls me and shows me his grandson via video link. He keeps asking me to come over, but I can't leave the house. Yes, and here I am among neighbors as my own and smiling through tears." Neighbor went to his apartment. Michael stood smoking under the fence net and did not understand why he remembered him. But fate would once again bring the neighbors together in this case, albeit in a very unusual way. And now Michael stood smoking, looking, and could not make a step and continue his way. "Maybe throw it to hell under his nose," said the guy. And then he almost jumped. On his shoulder lay the hand of William, the lead doctor, clinic, and supervisor of Michael's practice, who had seen the guy get off at the bus stop, how he had smoked, stopping under an old lime tree, and as he watched a group of paramedics walking in the courtyard of patients of doctors, laughing them among themselves, probably at some oily joke. Who are you gonna leave? Certainly not the practice at our fun and games place, but I think you're overdoing it on the fun and games. No, it's definitely that kind of black doctor humor. It is so, sort of so humor. The doctor smiled and took his ward under his arm and led him towards the psychiatric hospital, slowly but surely moving him towards the horrors that were going on inside its walls. The doctor had already made the decision to either involve Michael in his games or simply deprive him of his sanity if he did not agree to participate. Why him? It's simple. Michael is a new man in their collective one not so long ago, by chance, and he's strong for his age, plus handsome. Here is such a boy handsome, which is exactly suitable for filming spicy movies. Already in the clinic, the head doctor Noah and William took him through all the buildings, floors, and wards. Yes, the views are not the best, and emotions are not the brightest. Why should he be surprised, though? He knew where he was going. Michael was tormented by his grandmother's reasoning, but he knew if he asked that question directly, he'd be laughed at. But at the most, he'd get suspended. And the guy would never find out. Noah asked Michael over tea at the resident. There are all sorts of rumors about this clinic, in particular, mystical rumors. What do you have to say about that? Oh, Michael, you're a medical student, but you talk like a philology student who wants folklore. Or are you afraid of the ghost of the old empress or mother? The mother superior who drowned a truck in our pond at night. There's even a pond here. The boy's amazement was unparalleled. How long has he lived here in this town? I knew of clinics in the neighborhood, but the fact that there's also a pond. Remember the old movie about the Three Musketeers? Well, we have a lively pond just like that. It was organized by the previous head doctor. His wife worked as a landscape designer. So they set it up. We have a lily pond here. It's beautiful. There were fish swimming in it, but I guess our climate didn't suit them. They died out over the winter. But our patients don't care whether they're fish or lilies. And Ethan, an orderly with huge fists and a face resembling a tango arena, laughed as Michael's laughter made him shudder, and the doctors simply did not pay attention to him. And why do they tolerate such people in the clinic? Although on the other hand, there are some violent people who can't be subdued without physical force. Yeah, but Ethan's rudeness sometimes got to Michael, as did the thought of having to work with someone like that. Ethan, you show Michael to your office, where he can change his clothes, leave his things in the lockers and all that. He's only here for a couple months, so to speak, a couple months internship. But it's still got to be determined. Ethan nodded his head and waved his huge fist at Michael. Michael didn't show his displeasure. Let it be. A couple of months could be tolerated, and then he was promised to be taken to the second city as a staff psychiatrist, so he didn't worry about it too much. Michael obediently went down to the basement with Ethan and went to the very back of the clinic. Here, the orderlies had set up a room for a locker room and a kind of sports corner where you can hit a punching bag and play chess and dominoes. Don't be shy. Michael, take any locker that's not open. We have a lot of open seats right now, so let's get settled in. Why do so few people want to work at the clinic? Michael started asking questions from afar. I mean, who wants to hang out with a psycho? A lot of people think of it as a contagion. Being a psycho too. I just don't know any other job. Although at one time, just like you, I studied medicine. What did you study for? An orderly, that's what I studied. And my uncle put me to work here. My uncle. He's Noah. You've seen him. He's our chief of medicine. Good acquaintances, the boy thought, but he didn't say anything. Michael changed his clothes and began to get ready for his shift. The shift went relatively smoothly, and the next morning, the guy threw his backpack on his shoulders and left the clinic building. The sun was shining brightly, and there was nothing to portend any trouble, and all the things he had changed his mind about yesterday. Michael, it seemed like a fairy tale or fantasy. But really, what kind of fairy tales are fairy tales? We live in our developed world with computers, cameras on every corner. Even if there was something going on here, it would have been made public a long time ago. Michael, good morning. William called out to the guy and extended his hand to greet him and got straight to the point. How was your shift? Smoke. I don't smoke. Thank you. Yesterday it was just a dalliance, but the shift. Thank you. Everything went smoothly. William, can I make a personal request if I'm not interrupting something more important? Sure. Yes, of course. Anything I can do. Could you show me that pond you told me about yesterday? Wow. I guess you got caught up in the story last night. Come on. It's in the backyard. I'll show you around. I gotta be honest, you can't see it from the street. It took me a while to find it myself. It's so hidden, it's creepy. Is this place really inhabited? The center of Izhevsk. The doctor looked at him with a slight chuckle and said nothing, but waved his hand and led him deep into the park area of the hospital. Yeah, it's a bit of a wilderness, and that the most strange noise of cars from the street was not heard, although the clinic itself was located at the crossroads of quite busy central city roads. How quiet is it? And strangely enough, you can't hear much traffic from the road. Yes, you're right, Michael. You've noticed it's quiet. And here's the twig itself, and the head doctor spread the branches with his hands and let the boy go ahead. It's beautiful. Before, Michael opened a pond, laid out of stones behind burned black lilies, around which willows grew. And what was the most amazing thing? There were several statues in antique style of girls, hunting or carrying jugs on their shoulders. He had not seen such statues for a long time. Oh, it's beautiful. And notice the angle and the shot. You could even make a movie. What kind of horror movie have you seen in our cellars? There's no such thing as a cellar. Why? There are some. Yes, imagine that. And they lead to the local Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which is across the street from us. Are these cellars or cellars? I don't know. They lead to the monastery, and they say the monks at our clinic have the right people. And all because it wouldn't occur to anyone to look for a healthy person in a mental institution. Then there's been some kind of collapse in some places. Now these passages are impassable. That's for sure. No one's gonna come in here willingly. And then he noticed on the opposite bank the figure of a girl in a racy outfit. Kathy, he remembered her, because she had been brought here on the day when he had come to see the head doctor and applied for an internship at this clinic. The girl herself was not in the state she was in at the time. She was screaming at the doctors that the psychiatrist wanted to kill her. She's hearing voices and everything. That Kathy suffers from inner voices and a hypertrophied sex drive. Well, that's what her previous doctor said. Who knows? So far, the girl hasn't said a word. Why is she dressed like that? Short dress, fishnet stockings, ribbon in her hair. You know, Michael, it's one of my methods of letting the patient choose what they want. And by the way, where'd you get that outfit? That's a good question. Like many theatrical costumes, it was left to us by a theater. Exactly the theater. The director was jailed for some dark deeds, he and his wife. And the actors just ran away. And since the theater was near us, it's not a waste. And they were all dressed like royalty. Yes, imagining you as Henry Valois or Peter the Great. Michael, you're joking. But by the way, we had a wonderful carnival night here on New Year's Eve. And there was even a story about us in the paper. I hope it wasn't in a good context that a disguised Napoleon was walking around town claiming to be the real chief medical officer. No, we're all understanding people with a sense of humor. So we just hung around the Christmas tree. That one over there, by the way, by the entrance. And you know, People even took pictures with us on New Year's Eve. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the tour. I'm gonna go home and get some sleep. Thursday again for 24 hours. Michael, don't try too hard. You can't do all the work. You're a young guy. I nodded my head. But I thought to myself, no, I'm going to get you out of this. I think you're hiding something. Dear head doctor, but you don't need to know that. I had dinner tonight and sat down at the computer. Michael quickly made the first entries in his diary and then began to look for information about the local clinic. And indeed, there was a lot of information about it. Strangely enough, there was a lot of information about it, and with a very negative connotation. Murders, suicides, and strange deaths of both patients and doctors. Yes, there was a lot to work on and a lot to find out. But it was Kathy that bothered him the most. And he thought to himself, why not keep a sneaky eye on her room? The girl herself. Not without reason the head doctor was looking at her with such olive eyes. Grandma, the boy called out to his grandmother. Why did you shout like that? You won't let me watch my favorite TV show. What did you want? Grandma, I saw a girl at the clinic today. She was a victim of an incompetent hypnotist and suffered as a result. But that's not the point. She was wearing the outfit you mentioned, short dress, stockings, and a sash. Not surprising. One of your executives must have had their eye on her. I mean, she's new. She's a young girl too. I take it. So you're going to steal her? No, Grandma, I just want to keep an eye on her room. It's on the first floor, so it won't be a problem. To do anything, you have to have proof. That's what I'm required to do. Really, Michael, I'm old. I'm not going to play Sherlock Holmes with you. I'm more of a Mrs. Hudson. Grandma, that's not what I mean. Just cover for me in front of Mom. I'm gonna go over to the clinic tonight, stake out the windows, so to speak. I found a military A in Grandpa's closet. Okay, if anything, I'll tell Mom you're home already asleep. She's on call today anyway, so she won't be home. But you're my grandson, please. Don't get into any trouble. Okay. Michael nodded his head and poked the old lady on the cheek. He went back to his computer. What's going on at the clinic? How was your shift? The old woman was still interested in how true or not the rumors were. The rumors about the asylum. Yeah, Grandma. It's okay. I told you it was nothing like that. No, it's not. Our head doctor showed me the old pond on the grounds today, the one with the black lilies. Grandma didn't tell me about it. I went there and saw it because the wife of the former head doctor was my friend, and the pond itself is her creation. But the doctor didn't tell you that in the same pond they found the wife of the former one drowned. The guy shook his head, looked at his grandmother in surprise, but there's knee-deep water, and that's it. And this is the strangest thing. Her body was lying with her head in the water. She was submerged in the water, but her arms and legs were lying flat along her torso. They took a sturdy, adequate soldier and put her face down. That's all. And then they found water from the pond in his lungs. No signs of violence on the body. If that's what you're asking, it's odd that she came in, lay down, and swallowed the water to death. Drowned of her own volition. The guy was being sarcastic, but looking at the expression on his grandmother's face, he immediately faltered. Betty did not tolerate unnecessary words and jokes, and therefore immediately warned her grandson. Yes, Michael, death is strange. But if she did it herself, then she had a reason. And maybe even her own husband is the same as your current boss's overbearing. There's nothing to cure them. Maybe, under the old doctor, he and his brothers also had fun with innocent girls, and his wife found out and drowned them both. So, what of it? Or maybe who drowned them? But really, she won't become a ghost of a ghost, will she? Maybe she wouldn't. But believe me, there's something scary going on out there. And I'll tell you honestly, this new girl isn't worth the danger she's bringing upon herself. Trust me. The brotherhood of doctors. It's like that. Everyone protects each other. And even if they do something to her, that you can get to the bottom of it. But understand, a doctor will not testify against a doctor. So get on your nerves and leave her in there. At least I'll get her out and save her that way. All right. Michael, don't yell. I hear you. I accept your position. But I'm trying to warn you. You're putting yourself in a lot of danger. I understand all that. That's why I'm telling you where I'm going and what I intend to do. Betty nodded and stood up, heading for the door. She was worried about her grandson, but she realized she couldn't keep the young and hot guy away. So the woman simply stood on the doorstep and turned and said to Michael, "What if you take Uncle Benjamin, our neighbor from the second floor, to help you? He's old, but he's lean. And with his criminal record, he'd be a big help. I'll think about it. But it's not a bad idea. Although I'll tell you right away, I'll have to see for myself, do some recon, and then I'll tell them what's going on. Even if I go to him now, what can I say? Uncle Benjamin is there in the clinic raping women and many other things. And he'll tell me. Prove it. Just words. And I don't really believe it all myself. Just because a place is weird and old doesn't mean you can't ring all the bells. Yeah, there's too many girls. There's too many crazy people. And there's too many masquerades. But it's all right." And the grandmother left the room, closing the door a little behind her. Michael leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Uncle Benjamin is a criminal, but the grandmother is right. His experience and his nose for crime might help him. And an extra set of hands and eyes can always help. But first you have to go and see for yourself, and then you can go to your neighbor. All right, let's get ready. Michael threw a flashlight and a bottle of water into his backpack. Binoculars with good German optics can take a camera. What for? Basically, there's a cell phone. You can take video and photos with it. Okay, that's fine for the first time. Anyway, I'm not going to go in there. And throwing it on his shoulders, Michael went out into the corridor and began to study. The sounds Betty came out of his room and looked at his offspring carefully. You're coming. Yes, Grandma. Don't worry. I've got the phone, but don't call. I'll call you if I need to. In the meantime, lock it up. I think I'll be on the train in a couple of hours. 20 minutes to get there. An hour and a half and back. 20 minutes. So look, it'll be 3 hours. All right. Grandson, but please be careful. If anything happens to me, your mother will rip my head off." Michael smiled at his favorite person and kissed her. He went outside. It was getting dark. What's so surprising? After work he washed up, then ate and slept, and now full of strength can and observe. The guy smiled, thought to himself that he should have gone not to the doctor, but probably to the investigators. Here is a confirmation of his words. A patrol car passed by and lit up the road with flashing beacons, but it alarmed the guy. No, not the car itself, not the flashing lights. It was the fact that the policeman stopped it around the corner and got out quietly, covering the door. They slammed it shut, as usual, quietly slipped through the hole in the fence of the psychiatric clinic, and went just as quietly, whispering among themselves. Wow. The cops are also in business, and the young medic's bewilderment had no limit. Did these columns, as his grandmother would say, come here too? Wow. Now, it's not just medical malpractice anymore. It's a group of gangs. And that's what he's encountered in practice. Come on. Maybe he just made a mistake, and the police came here on a signal, so to speak, to check what's going on here. But still, these two were acting weird, uncharacteristic. Michael slowly went in the direction of the secret eye. In the fence, jumped in the chassis, hiding behind the dense vegetation, and abundantly growing along this fence. That was a plus right now, and it wasn't exactly a starry night. So the guy slowly crept toward the ominous, overhanging park clinic. This three-story old pre-revolutionary building was an eyesore in the city. It was going to be demolished long ago, moving the facility to the outskirts. But apparently, it wasn't worth it for the high-ranking officials to go there in search of hidden pleasures. "Come on, come in here," quietly said one policeman, and let the other one inside. The basement. Wow, they got the basement entrance open. I wonder who's on shift today. An old orderly with a long history of alcohol abuse, or Liam. Another one of the orderlies with a huge fist. When Michael himself asked about the door to the basement and the padlock, the head doctor secretly smiled and said, "This is the entrance to our basement paradise. And is it like growing marijuana there?" Michael decided to make a joke, but I guess the joke didn't work. The doctor looked at him sideways and said it wasn't pot. It was something else, but it's too early for him to know. Everything will show and tell later. And now they just let outsiders into this forbidden paradise. Maybe they are part-time. Security guards? Michael chuckled under his nose and began to approach the clinic building even more quietly. The windows of the wards on the first floor glowed with a dim light. It was the way the duty lights burned. And the light itself was enough to see what was going on in the wards. The guy intuitively approached the window of the room of the new patient Kathy, and from surprise, almost dumbfounded on the spot. Kai saw her sitting on the bed, dressed in a short school drill dress and with bows in her hair. Yeah, the guy almost whistled in surprise. And apparently, the girl heard his exclamation and looked out the window. Michael intercepted her gaze for a second. He was devastated. Apparently, she'd been pre-sedated with sedatives. But at the same time, there was a silent plea for help. But then, Liam and the doctor in charge entered the room, and the boy sat down instantly so as not to be seen. Michael sat under the window and listened intently to what was going on in the room itself. He heard the footsteps of two men and the creaking of a bed. Then the words of the head doctor. "Hello, Kathy. You're already dressed as well as you can be. Now let's go down to the basement with me and Liam. You'll find a lot of interesting things there." The basement where the two policemen went. Apparently, they had some sort of organized pleasure nook down there. And that's where they took her, drugged her with psychotropics. But what to do? The guy quietly sank to the ground and put his hands around his head. What to do? What to do? And then the front door creaked and Michael squeezed into the ground. 3 men came out of them and headed towards the basement. Good night was dark, and the yard of the clinic was not illuminated. Therefore, he simply was not noticed. But only the girl turned back, looked in his direction, and cried. Tears rolled silently down her face. Michael heard Noah begin to quietly soothe the girl and told the orderly, "Liam at the school, to her in the basement for another dose of sedative. We didn't want her to wake up at the right moment, and the chief of police wasn't happy with his new doll." "Yeah, sure, Noah. Let's get her in and give her a quick shot." And the trio began to make their way down to the basement. Michael had one single desire: to break into the basement and snatch Kathy out of the hands of doctors and cops. But he realized how impossible that would be. No, he was not intimidated by the company, the doctors and the cops, to do their dark deeds. But he realized they'd just smash him there. And that would be it. And no one will know where his grave is. Call the militia. What will he say there? The head doctor and a policeman raping a mentally ill patient won't believe him. And even if they do, what's next? But the brigade will arrive on a call. And what? Nothing. If the police come to such costume parties, it means that the management is aware of it, and at least the case will be closed. At the most, they can either kill him in the same basement and bury him here or put him in jail for something. I mean, even if it's for abusing Kathy. So think, Michael, think. Maybe you're imagining things. Yeah. And the cops are here for nothing. But at that very moment, the basement door opened and a policeman came running out. "Vasia," he shouted, "I've been away for a couple of hours. There's an emergency at the police station, but I'll be back later. Leave me that girl for later." And the policeman rushed to the car. The guy heard the engine roar and the tires skid across the sand. But the strangest thing was that from the cellar no one answered him, and no one had ever closed the door. It wasn't locked. It's called "Come In." Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Michael rushed to the cellars and started to go down the stairs, listening to every sound. But he heard nothing, neither footsteps nor any other sounds. There were supposed to be at least 4 people down there. And they certainly weren't singing lullabies, but maybe it was for the best. The boy opened the cellar door and slipped inside. The corridor was sparsely lit, and there was a pantry open right next to the entrance. The guy peeked into it just in case, to make sure there was no one there. And in case of emergency, he could hide in this room. Yes, there are shelves and bears in principle a place for a hiding place. But at that very moment, at the end of the corridor, footsteps were heard. It was the guest of the night police and the head doctor. The boy immediately recognized the figure of his superior. They were talking quietly about something, and as they approached, the boy could hear what they were talking about. What he heard made him not just overcome, but terrified to the point of truly experiencing fear not only for the poor girl, but for his own life. "Noah, thank you for the welcome. But you see, the warden's gone. We've had an emergency at the council since this morning. The commission's here, so we're saving Kathy for dessert, so to speak. Yes, you understand correctly. Everything is normal. No excesses or incidents. No one is interested in anything. Yes, in principle, everything's fine. Except we got a new orderly coming in for an internship. We didn't apply for the internship, but he did. So, they're interested in the job, and the clinic in particular. Why are our patients dressed so oddly? Of course, like you said, it's all been blamed on the tour and the theater we had a year ago. And then they disbanded it. But I don't think he believed it. So what do you suggest? Maybe we should press him a little so he doesn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong." "No, I think I can handle it. And you know, it's normal to be questioned about our clinic." Michael listened and realized it was about him. His breath cleared, and he even found it hard to breathe. And as luck would have it, the couple stopped near the open door to the storeroom, where the new employee was hiding behind the racks with his colleagues. The policeman looked into the storeroom, but seeing nothing, quietly said to the head doctor, "Okay, Noah, let's postpone our sit-downs for the time being. Lie down while holding this girl. The chief liked her, and the school drill outfit matches. We'll be there in a couple days. In the meantime, we'll be in touch. Call me if you need anything." The head doctor didn't say anything. He escorted the guest outside and returned a couple minutes later. Michael, all these minutes, which seemed like hours to him, sat and did not breathe, although his heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out of his chest. And this breathing and heartbeat, it seemed to the lad to be striking a bell in the silence. But there was nothing he could do about it. The boy heard the head doctor pass by his cell and head deep into the corridor, muttering something to himself. After a few minutes, he looked out of the door and, seeing no one, slipped out into the street. He breathed in the cool air of the night and took a few deep breaths in and out and began to make his way toward the dead vine. At the fence, Michael walked slowly, not even looking around, being in slight shock at everything he saw. What could be going on in there? What did I see there? Nothing. Just heard the doctor and the cops talking about something. But I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe it's some kind of videotape as part of a police investigation. The guy was trying to drown out the thoughts that kept popping into his head, and he'd heard of costume parties like this a long time ago. But to have minds devoid of girls and women take part in it, there was no such thing. All right, Who am I kidding? Trying to fool. There's definitely something going on in that basement that's scary and illegal. And it's got to stop. Poor girls. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He'd have to go to Uncle Benjamin. That old bastard will surely tell him what to do, won't he? How? He'll help. The guy did not notice how he reached the house, how he went up to the floor and opened the doors with his keys, closing them quietly. Michael leaned against the wall and from powerlessness and experience simply slid to the floor. Grandma came out of the room at that moment and flicked the light switch. The bright light blinded the guy. It and realized, "Grandma, why are you awake?" He tried to look normal, but apparently the expression on his face told the old lady everything. "Why? You want me to tell you why? What happened? Tell me. You're white as chalk." "Grandma, I don't want to. I wish I was like this right now. Come on, go take a shower to wash off the negativity. Then we'll go to the table. I spared a cutlet, and I'll pour you one of my own." The guy did not argue and simply went to the bathroom, pulled off all the clothes and scattered them on the way. When in the bathroom heard the sound of water, Betty collected the guy's things and threw them into the washing machine. "No dirt to lay around. I'll wash everything tomorrow." When Michael came out of the bathroom, there was a late dinner and a bottle of tincture on the table. The woman poured him a shot and handed it to him without saying anything. Nor did the grandson ask anything. He took it quietly and knocked it over. All at once. "Take the cutlets, mashed potatoes, salad. Let's eat." The guy sat down at the table without saying a word. He poured himself a second shot of olive and tipped it just as quietly and started on the homemade cutlets. He ate and thought, should he tell his grandmother of his suspicions? But Betty was not so foolish, as modern young people might think. I take it Kathy had gotten into the local psychiatric brothel and was simply being kept on psychotropic drugs. Michael chewed and nodded his head and simply couldn't drop a word. Not because he was eating, but because he was choked with emotion, and he didn't want to upset his grandmother. But his grandmother was not stupid and immediately realized everything as soon as his grandson entered the house. "You know, grandmother, there are not only doctors involved, there are also the police, and most likely, the very top. They came here today, twirled around and left. It's like an emergency in the department. So they didn't stay the night. And this girl." And then Michael shook from the experience. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop. How could they do that? It's not just they're renting prostitutes who know what they're in for and where they're going. And all this with mentally ill women. How so? "Michael, I get it. That's why I told you not to go there, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've got to figure out how to deal with it. You're not going to go to the police. You said it yourself. The whole chain of command is tied up. So what do? You can't go with a machine gun against everyone. You don't have to do it yourself. I told you. Go talk to our neighbor tomorrow. You know, the one below us, Benjamin. He's a thief. He's old school, I think. Plus, he's got a grudge against the police. So if he doesn't help, he'll certainly tell me what to do and who to turn to." The guy nodded his head and poured himself another olive. He drank and couldn't taste it. Slowly he digested all that he had seen and heard, thinking how he should proceed. But Babushkina's spit turned out to be quite strong, and already in half an hour the guy was pecking his nose. "Go to bed, my sorrow. Tomorrow mother will come, and you with red eyes sleep. And then I'll cook for you for the evening. Pour the stuffed cabbage. With all this good stuff you'll go and ask your neighbor for advice. Grandma, thank you. I'm going." Michael only laid his head on the pillow, as he was immediately dreaming. He slept and did not dream, though emotions so and so raged inside him. But apparently the young body could handle giving his head a rest. Indeed, he slept until almost lunchtime. And when he got up at 12 o'clock, He found no one home in the kitchen. All he caught was a note from his mother. Say, lunch on the table from his grandmother, stuffed cabbage in her purse, cash in the fridge in the back. We had a snack in Russia too. Michael went down to the second floor and called Uncle Benjamin's apartment. He didn't open the door right away, but he wouldn't let the guys in. Michael, do you want something? Uncle Benjamin, my grandmother gave you Golutsov, and he pointed to the bottle. And then I'd like to talk to you about a sensitive matter. The old one stomped on the doorstep. He liked Betty's stuffed cabbage, and it wasn't nice to say no to a neighbor. It wasn't proper. But he had guests he didn't want Michael to meet. The guy heard he had a stranger as a guest, maybe the lady of his heart, and he's here with his own problems. Uncle Benjamin, if I'm interrupting, I'm sorry, but can I come back later? Yes. Michael, I'm sorry, guest, come back at 8 o'clock. And here's Betty. A special thank you. Her stuffed cabbage is a work of art. Benjamin nodded his head and closed the door gently. Yeah, the stuffed cabbage and cash came in handy. There would be something to feed and drink an old friend. He came unexpectedly, and frankly speaking, the Skull's visit surprised Benjamin and made him a little wary. And what does the Skull need from old Kogan? And a vagabond. Yeah, maybe our old friend stomping on the doorstep for starters. Hopefully, the doorstep isn't where friends have a business conversation. Oh no, sure, come on in. Except there's nothing to buy. But I did not come here to eat. The restaurant will not feed. If you want strong tea with your girlfriends, I won't refuse. You owe me tea and my girlfriends. When Benjamin went to put the kettle on, the doorbell rang. It was Michael, but not the landlord. Neither did his guests know about it. Both were wary. But since Benjamin had long since retired and felt no guilt, he boldly opened the door. After talking to his neighbor for a few minutes, he returned to the room with the fools and the cash. Oh, I see the delivery service is working perfectly, joked the Skull. Yes, in the face of the upstairs neighbor. He came in to talk some business, so I brought this to butter the old man up. But I asked him to wait till tonight. In the meantime, try these homemade stuffed cabbage. By the way, and cherry is a delight. The men sat down at the table, poured a shot glass each, and, having drunk, had a snack. And how not to drink, because it would make the conversation easier. Benjamin looked at the old thief in the law and quietly asked what brought you to me. You didn't just come 10 years after our last case. Yes, I did. And for good reason. I'll tell you right off the bat. I was put in charge of this town not that long ago, but I think you already know that. Now, I've heard rumors that young girls and women have been going missing in this town for the last few years. Well, you can blame it on anything, although all roads lead to your local mental institution. You know what I'm getting at? Yeah, I've heard bad things about her too, Benjamin said, and poured another round of shots. But how can I tell you, Skull? They're just rumors. You know, you can't do anything without proof. That's true. But in addition to the fact that young girls have been brought into this almshouse and treated for whatever reason, the cops have been frequenting it in recent months. They probably set up a brothel there together with the doctors and have fun there. And how not to party? It's a hell of a roof. Skull, are you sure? The old watcher nodded his head and threw a piece of fool into his mouth. He poured himself and his friend a shot for cream. What was there to say? Home-cooked food, still, that delicacy and luxury. And he, as an old thief who had spent most of his life in colonies and prisons, understood that. But that's not what we're talking about now. The daughter of a street. Petersburg authority figure is missing. And so far, all roads lead here. You see, Alex's daughter is missing. Well, you remember him. He was on my team. Then he retired. He's got a family, but his daughter's missing. And all roads lead here to this mental institution. Yeah, and you said she could be in that new house. What about him? What did he do? He's been raising his own, and he's almost filed a police report. But nothing. Benjamin sat and thought about it. He really heard from his friends that in the last couple of years young beauties began to disappear and that it was the doctors or the cops who were involved. But that was talk, and no more evidence. But if the daughter of an authority figure has disappeared and the tracks led here, that's serious. Skull, couldn't it be a banal showdown? It's been speculated. But no, that's not it. Is that why I need your help? How long have you lived near this fine establishment in this town? Take a good look, Skull. By the way, Michael, but the guy who came in the other day with these fools, he works there as an orderly. How does he work? I think he's been there a while. But I asked him. That's what we decided. But in the evening, Benjamin didn't even have to ask the guy. 8 o'clock sharp. He was already sitting in his kitchen and drinking strong and sweet tea, which the owner had brewed, and put in front of the guy. Come on, complain, who has offended? What happened? Yes, you see, I only have a son-in-law here. You know, I finished the basic course in my medical school, and now I'm practicing. But guess what? I know our psychiatric clinic. I've complained before. And I warned you, it's gonna be tough out there. But what happened? And by the way, I have a couple questions for you about your psych ward. Later, though. Now, come on, tell me. So my grandmother and some other people said there was something going on there, but I didn't believe it. But my grandmother pointed out one thing to me. They dress. The young and beautiful in short dresses and stockings and braid their hair. And do you know why? Michael looked at his neighbor, and in his throat stood. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew he needed help, at least in advice, at least in deed. The old thief sat and looked at the guy, realizing that he not only needed to speak out and ask for advice, but the conversation itself was going in the right direction for him. You see, Uncle Benjamin, they raped them there. Maybe they're even videotaping the whole thing. The guy just gasped at his own words and the realization that Kathy was there and what could be done to her. He took a breath and continued. That's why I came. I've heard about this clinic for a long time, but last night I decided to go and look around. But in short, Uncle Benjamin, I saw 2 cops going down to the basement, as well as our head doctor as an orderly, and they were taking a new girl down there. But apparently the cops had some kind of emergency, and they left quickly. But most importantly, I heard one of them telling our head doctor to leave the girl for later. The guy briefed me on the whole thing and looked at the reaction of the old tramp. On his face was read not only surprise, but also interest, especially the last news. Kathy was the name of the daughter of a street Petersburg authority who was considered missing or even killed, almost by order of the opposing gangs. And what does this girl look like? Tell me. I'm sorry, I'm asking you this for a reason. A friend of mine had a missing daughter. Her name was Kathy, and it all leads back to our town. Maybe it's her. The guy thought about it for a minute and started describing her in detail. But the most important feature the guy remembered was a scar on her left ankle. Then he listened and couldn't believe his ears. He knew the street Petersburg authority Alex and his daughter, and the very scar the girl had gotten, falling from a tree. His heart stabbed. Wow, that's how you find an authority figure's missing daughter. That's lucky. But maybe it's not her at all. Michael, why don't you show her to me? But we'll go tonight, when the patients are out on the street. Show it to me gently. But in terms of what's being done to them, we'll have to get into that basement, look in the nooks and crannies. Can you get the key? Michael shook his head negatively, but Benjamin just waved his hand. What can I expect from you? He went into the room and rummaged through the closet. A set of thieves' lockpicks was there. Basically, we can look inside this basement at night. Okay, Michael, when are you going to work? Tomorrow. Well, we'll go together early in the morning. You'll show me from afar. The basement, and then if you're psychotic, sorry, patients are walking around. Point your finger at Kathy. They don't go out this early. They only let them out at lunchtime and in the evening. Okay, well, just show me the basement. And then at lunchtime, I'll come to that walk, and you can show me Kathy. But why? Uncle Benjamin, you think she's your friend's daughter. I knew for a fact she was no fool. From your description, it looks like it, but I'll have to see for myself. So Michael, it would help if you showed her to me. As for proof, I can pick any lock. Just dibs. It's our secret. I'll look, and then, if there's anything interesting, we'll figure out how to proceed. Michael was fine with that, and he calmed down a bit. But then I asked him the same question. What if there is nothing there that can be caught on? Michael, you're like a little child. I know exactly what to look at and what to look for. And then we'll set up a camera and film their antics. The old bastard chuckled, but when he looked at the boy's face, he stopped short. Yeah, I guess he wasn't laughing. Although, if you think about it, it's the height of cynicism to do such a thing as people in white coats and the police cover for them. Yeah, I got a special thing for the police. Plus, if this Kathy brothers thank me very much. Michael, I'm sorry. I guess years in places not so remote haven't made a saint out of me. But I do feel sorry for your charges, especially since some of them were just stabbed with antidepressants and sedatives, and now they're doing this. But that's okay. I'll take a look. We'll set up cameras if we have to. Then I'll report everything to the gang, and they will disperse your gang in no time. Michael listened and understood that the neighbor could do all this. But how to get the whole gang out? Uncle Benjamin. But understand the proof for your friends is good, but the case must be taken to court. Michael, do you take me for a fool? Imagine for a minute, if we're looking for my friend's daughter, he'll make such a scandal. He'll involve everyone he can. Lawyers and press, law enforcement, you name it. But most importantly, your head doctor and his cronies won't get away. That's what I need. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For some reason, he believed this old jailer, although he realized that Benjamin was not without sin. All right, Benjamin, let me show you the loophole in the fence at the entrance tomorrow, and then the cellar itself. And you can come to this vine by 12 o'clock. That's when our patients take their lunchtime walks. I'll try to show you Kathy. Benjamin nodded and sipped from a cup of strong tea. He was satisfied with today. Helping Skull and freeing Kathy would be a big plus for him, and he'd been wanting to mess with the cops for a long time, if they were really nasty in that asylum. Michael got up and went home. It was almost 22 o'clock on the clock. It was necessary to wash and sleep. Tomorrow was a crucial and decisive day. In the morning, Benjamin, already 6:45, stood near the entrance and smoked. He put on a dark, unremarkable suit cap and dark glasses. He pulled up a cigarette and thought about the situation with Michael, Kathy, and this almshouse in general. Uncle Benjamin, hello. Michael greeted his neighbor and extended his hand to him. The man flashed him a cigarette and shook his hand. Quietly, Michael said, "Just call me Benjamin without uncle. I feel like an old man. I'm not young, but I'm not an old man at heart. All right, you ready to go?" He nodded, and the men walked slowly in the direction of the psychiatric clinic, talking among themselves. Like old friends, Michael walked and looked around so as not to catch the eye of the head doctor or one of the orderlies. There was no need to draw attention to himself. Approaching the fence of the psychiatric clinic, Michael looked around carefully and pointed with his hand to the entrance to the basement. This is the basement, and there's an opening further along the fence into the grounds. Just right for you. Just right. Now let's move on. They went further, passing the very gap in the fence, which was so advantageously disguised by the leaves of wild ivy and vines. Michael looked around again and pointed to the platform. In front of the main entrance, This is our so-called women's quarters, and it's where our patients walk from 12 until lunchtime. If anything I can say from my observation, Kathy often likes to stand under that London tree, which is closer to the road. I've noticed her standing under the tree a couple of times, looking out at the roadway. Kathy nodded his head and lit a cigarette. He went on his way, throwing a few words to the guy. Good, then I'll see you tonight, or rather, tomorrow. Drop by my place in the evening to look at the collections. Michael looked at his neighbor and said nothing. He's weird. But on the other hand, he needs help now. And if the neighbor helps, it will be great. After all, even one life-saving achievement of medicine shift this day went quietly. No incidents, excesses, or patient antics. No nighttime police visits that might have suggested bad thoughts. Except that Kathy was restless this day. Michael watched her from the residence window, and at one point, noticed the girl becoming anxious. She began to wave her head intensely, and her ribbons in her hair fluttered in the wind. Then she turned abruptly and ran away from the fence. Directing his life toward Black Pond, the boy looked carefully at the roadway. Near the curb stood a dark blue, unremarkable car, old, but on the move. Strange. Who is it? Michael said it out loud. And then another orderly, Liam, turned around and looked out the window. What kind of car is that? We've got to get to the bottom of this. And he ran out of the office. And in a few seconds, his broad back, the guy saw near the fence. The orderly waved his hands, shouted something in the direction of the driver. But apparently, it had no effect. A few minutes later, though, when the chief physician started to approach the car suddenly sped off. That's an interesting situation. What's all the fuss about? It's just a car. You can't even see through the tinted windows. Who's in there? After a couple of minutes, Liam entered the office red as a boiled crawfish and started pacing the room back and forth. Michael at first said nothing, and then asked with the most indifferent tone possible, "And who was it in the car?" "Yes, you see, Michael, one psycho or psychos drive here under the fence and look at our patients. File a police report." The guy deliberately put such a provocative question, looking at the orderly and watching his reaction, but his face reflected nothing but anger and irritability. What's the use of these cops? They only throw up their hands. They say it's none of our business. No corpus delicti and all that. And we have to run around chasing these assholes away. Yeah, there's plenty of crazy people out there. By the way, have you noticed how new this is? Kathy's patient react to that car. No, I didn't see her shaking, and she stood there shaking her head, and then she ran toward Black Pond. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say something? And the orderly rushed out into the street. I wonder why he reacted like that. Michael became curious, and he went to the window. The orderly was standing next to the head doctor, telling him something. Then he pointed toward the pond, and they both went there at a brisk pace. This is interesting, thought the trainee, and quickly ran to the first floor. He went to the artificial pond, which enjoyed a bad reputation already on the shore of the notorious Black Pond. The guy caught a picture on the shore, sat Kathy, and swayed, and near her stood an orderly and the chief physician, and nervously smoked. Guy did not understand what was going on. So he approached the trio and nodding at the girl, asked, "No, what happened?" "Yeah, you know, Michael. The first day Kathy almost went swimming in the lake, and when Liam said she ran here, I thought she had a craving for water again. So she'd have wet her feet in waist-deep water. How can I put it, Michael? Our patients are such that they can drown themselves in a spoonful of water, and her reaction to the car Liam told me about also surprised me. She never showed any emotion before. Maybe the hypnosis has stopped working, and she is coming to her senses and grieving. You've probably been skipping classes on the subject of hypnosis, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't weaken over time. It's not sleeping pills or tranquilizers, is it? I guess, Noah, I guess. Both Michael and the doctor in charge stood by the lake for a few minutes, watching as the orderly took Kathy to the women's ward. I wonder what's going to happen to her and why she reacted the way she did to the car parked near the fence. Is there something to that? I'll have to tell my neighbor about it. Maybe he knows something, but the neighbor was the one in that car. Benjamin kicked his old broad out of the garage and thought it would be more convenient to watch the loony bin on wheels. It was at 1:30 that he drove the car up to the place where the loonies were strolling, and oh joy, near this fence stood Kathy. It was the daughter of the St. Petersburg authority figure. There was no doubt about it. Yes, he had seen her about 15 years ago. She had grown up and become a beautiful girl, but her eyes were still the same, just like when he'd seen her at her birthday party when she was 7. I wonder if the scar is still there. I should ask Michael to look at the scar on her leg. That's the only way to tell. I parked Benjamin's car with the window down and looked at the girl carefully. They must have drugged the poor girl with some pills. She's as good as dead. Eyes blank, all dressed up in some stupid costume. Yeah, I guess the guy's right about it all looking like something. The man rolled down the passenger side window more and called out to the girl. Kathy, listen to me. Don't be afraid. I'm Uncle Benjamin. Do you remember me? The girl stood there for a minute, paying no attention to the car and the driver. Then she turned her head and looked at him. At that moment, Benjamin waved his hand and smiled. But a meaningful thought suddenly flashed on the girl's face, and she began to shake her head, and then screamed and rushed running towards the park. Shit. Benjamin didn't expect such a reaction, and so quickly, closing the window, rushed out of the place in the direction of the city. I don't want to be seen here, otherwise they'll dump the office. Benjamin drove around the city for half an hour, and coming back, he could not resist and drove slowly along the fence of the psychiatric clinic. But there was no one in the yard. It must be lunchtime, the man said to himself, and decided to have a snack. He turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe to drink strong flavored coffee and eat a sweet mug. He had long favored this cafe with its own pastry shop. It served the strongest coffee and delicious pastries, just like when he was a kid. Yes, the man thought, when my grandson comes to visit me, I'll definitely bring him here with his father to drink coffee and eat more delicious food. But emotions came over Benjamin at the mention of his grandson, and a traitorous terror returned to his eye. You're not well. The waitress came up to the man and handed him a menu. No, the girl just remembered his grandson, who lives abroad with his father, and thought that it would be nice to bring him here. It's just a bit of a rush, so to speak. I understand. Coffee and a mug for you as always. Although, you know, I'd advise you that our pastry chef has never tasted better. Let's have your labor. We should try it. Because, girlfriends. The man drank coffee and smiled at the rays of sunshine that penetrated the cafe, fell on his table and hands. It was so good to just sit there and think about nothing and enjoy every minute. But he had to go home and think about how to plan his evening, or rather, his night out at the clinic. Benjamin paid for his coffee and, leaving the waitress a generous tip, drove home. Already at home he slept, touched up, under the shower, and after making himself a strong tea, sat down in the kitchen. Coffee is good, but strong and sweet tea helped him to think. Probably habits from places not so distant were making themselves known, but he had long ago stopped paying attention to the fact that he was sitting down and what people would think of it. And now he was helping a friend whose daughter had disappeared under very strange circumstances. A traitorous terror came to Benjamin's eye again. He remembered his daughter, beautiful and clever, who had gone to the Emirates and found her happiness there. How she was happy about her new job, and her husband, who, to his credit, loved her very much. Pregnancy and rejoiced. But, so Benjamin Nikita do not need to wipe the snot and pull Kathy and the man began to pack a backpack, a flashlight, and an old lockpick set for a night out. Machine oil, so the lock wouldn't stick, if anything. Now, having lost one daughter, he wanted to help his friend Kathy's daughter get out of the asylum. The man had long thought about why she had been kidnapped a year ago from her father's home, and many people had written it all off as a thievery. But that's not the case here. Alex is a competent and clever man. He's handled the most heated disputes, so sworn enemies parted as friends and best partners. And here, who would take revenge? No, the man shook his head. It's something else, he thought to himself, not what others think. Why did he think that? He didn't know. But if the girl he'd seen today was Kathy and was his friend's daughter, Benjamin realized what the reason might be. The girl had an unearthly beauty, her figure, long blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had the same mind as her father. And if he was right, then she was probably kidnapped by visiting tourists who were in the business of kidnapping and shooting racy movies. Maybe that's what happened. But the man was simply afraid to think what Kathy might have done. After all, even among the right criminal authorities, violence is a forbidden topic. A woman must be loved. She must be persuaded. You have to placate her with gifts and kisses, but you can't rape her. All the more to shoot nasty things against her will. It's one thing for a woman to do it for money. It's another to rape her. Well, it's gonna be all right now. Be patient, Kathy. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders, Benjamin went out into the street and headed towards the psychiatric clinic. It was already dark, and there were no stars in the sky. What pleased the old thief? He quietly approached the fence and skulked away, but with a ducking motion. He stopped imperiously under a tree and looked around. There was no one. There was silence. It was ringing dark. Only, in the windows of the first-floor patients' rooms, there was a dim light burning. That's good. That means I won't need a flashlight. This light will suffice. And the man rushed to the cellar, quickly oiled the lock, and opened it professionally. Benjamin did not hang it in place, leaving the door covered, but not tightly, so that in case of need he could quickly run out. The hinges should be oiled as well. It wouldn't be good if the door suddenly peeked open quickly, coping with the hinges. The man began to listen to the sounds in the basement and slowly walked forward. The hallway was quiet. On the left side were storerooms, some closed, others without doors. That's fine, the old thief thought. There will be a place to hide in case of trouble. Strange, where these subhumans had found a porn studio. But at the very end, Benjamin saw a massive door, so stuffed with felt. Yeah, there you are, and soundproofed at the very end so no one could hear the girls screaming, the bastards. He went to the door and listened. But what kind of work had been done there? But what kind of barrier was there? There was no door that could not be opened by an old thief who had gone through a fine school. Indeed, the locks were also hidden under a layer of felt. Good point. No sound will get through the gaps. Well, that's clever, but I'll get you open. The man lifted the layer of felt carefully and listened. Quiet, which means no one. That's good, which means we can work. And Benjamin carefully began to pick the lock. Yes, it's a fancy lock, but for a craftsman like me, it shouldn't be too hard to pick. And after a couple minutes, the man opened the door to the secret studio. Wow, that's quite a spread. The furnishings, state-of-the-art, technology, and newfangled digital equipment, all put to great use. No wonder with the police running it all. And apparently, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, I guess crazy movies are popular with crazy people, but that man heard how heavy doors, covered with his lacquer, began to open, and without thinking, Benjamin jumped under the bed. That's quite a situation. At least the bed was wide, and it was covered with a long sheet all the way to the floor. Shit, thought the thief. What a fool not to listen to what was going on outside the door. So I got him. The main thing is not to suspect anything and not to search the place. But apparently the unexpected guests didn't suspect a thing. Oh, look, Noah's already opened the door. Didn't have to fiddle with the lock. Yeah, Stas. It's a nice studio. There's plenty of room for fun. And the man sat down on the bed and took pictures, and he laughed. Apparently, it was the cops Michael was talking about, who had been let in by the head doctor. So Benjamin quietly exhaled and listened further. Yes, boss. What are we going to do here? Are we going to film racy scenes? No, just participate. We got some local girls from the head doctor. So we'll try new things, boss will. It's not very exciting, but it's mental. I don't know what's on her mind. Would she bite or stab at the peak of pleasure? No. Yeah, well, it's a valid concern, Benjamin thought. But if you had a knife, you'd be so heavy. You'd be falling out of bed. You must be 150 pounds. And all that on a young girl. Ugh, that's disgusting. But what to do? So far, luck was not on his side. But then another man came into the room and said, "Sorry, Mr. Mikhailovich, I can't make it today. Apparently, it's either the moon or the stars. But our girls are on a rampage." Aha. Apparently, the head doctor tearfully apologizes for his wards. But apparently, the police brass didn't like the news. And he's not happy. Noah, why is that? Or does the hospital no longer have the appropriate injections? We've injected a couple of times, and the girl sleeps well. Yeah, we've already injected them, but it's still wrong. I'm sorry. Come back in a couple days and I'll put them on hard shots. Then they'll be as smooth as silk. All right. The cop said grudgingly and got out of bed, walked towards the exit. But next time, there should be 2 or even 3 girls. The doctor answered nothing, but only closed the door behind his guests, locking it shut. After a few minutes, the thief crawled out from under the bed and began to look around. He decided not to rush out of the room, but to put his video camera here. He definitely needed proof of what was going on here. Kathy then. He can quietly get out of the room, but this office needs to be covered up, and he knows to whom he will send the received materials. To his daughter Alex. Unsure he'd tear anyone's throat out. Quietly, looking around, only stopped her gaze on the partners who were closing the improvised window. So over there at the very top you can install a camera. Yeah, it was a good thing he had his introductions. And not too long ago, he'd been fitted with a mini camera that ran on batteries and turned on the recording at any movement. So, sweetie, put it up and film it here. And the other day I'll come and check what you've prepared for me and make sure the camera is in working order. Benjamin copied carefully his video, point, and check everything behind him and quietly left the room. He locked the door and quietly walked out of the basement. There was no one near the entrance, but still God protects him, said the nun. The thief said quietly and began to walk along the walls to the cherished fence. Going out into the street, he took and walked along the road, pretending to stroll in the picturesque. Cat, taking in his hands a pre-prepared bottle of beer. And even if he was stopped by the police, they would not be able to attribute anything but an administrative offense to him. Although it's not like breaking into a mental institution, but I'll get over it. And with a quiet step, he went in the direction of his house. Got to the house. Benjamin quickly for about 10 minutes and already in his apartment, having thrown off his clothes and stood under the shower, he exhaled with relief. Yes, I have not seen such a case since the dashing 90s. But the good thing is now there will be evidence and grounds to visit you, gentlemen in white coats on legal grounds, and smash your balaganza with all the proletarian hatred. We've had a night's experience, and the smell of a psychiatric clinic. Old Kogan went to the kitchen and made himself some tea. He had to think calmly about what he had seen and how to present it to his street Petersburg friend. The fact that they were making strawberries there, the man realized. And in principle, the camera will definitely record all the abominations. It's a matter of technique and time. But what about the girl who looked a lot like Kathy? You'll have to leave that to Michael. He works there, albeit as an orderly, but it would be easier for him to examine her under any pretext. Now, we just have to wait for the morning and for what Michael and I will bring. Benjamin turned off the light and left the cup on the table and went to bed. After all, the coming day also promised a lot of things to do and new information. It was necessary to have a fresh head to think everything over and make the right decision. Already, closer to 10 o'clock to the old thief at the door rang. Probably Michael, and he was not mistaken. Uncle Benjamin, I came straight from work to see you. May I come in? I've been waiting for you. I just got up and made breakfast. Give me my hands and sit down at the table. I don't feel like eating right now. Uncle Benjamin, do you have a lump in your throat? Our lunatics almost went crazy today. I don't know what happened, but they all went crazy. Some howled, others sang songs, and the women's ward all threw off their clothes. It was a restless night, I know. Michael looked at his neighbor perplexed, but did not ask anything. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate of scrambled eggs Benjamin had placed in front of him. I stopped by her lovely basement today and got into the spicy studio. And by the way, while I was there were visitors, most likely. Your Noah, the head doctor, and the police. But don't worry, nothing happened. First came the cops, then came your doctor and said that the patients are raging. So everything was quickly turned off. But it's not worth the wait. He promised them strawberries in a couple days. So, but no. But I left the video camera there for now. I'll pick it up in a couple days. We'll see what's on it. And then we'll figure out where to go and who to show it to. By the way, did you check to see if this new Kathy patient of yours has a cross-shaped scar? Yeah, the night before everyone else. I was working on her, and I got a good look at it. It's a small one just below the kneecap. Benjamin nodded and smiled. So it really is Kathy. She had been found. There was no doubt now. That was good. I'd have to get proof of the lechery, the doctors, and the police. Then we could celebrate. Victory. It's her, said Benjamin, eating scrambled eggs. There's no doubt now, but we have to wait a while. Let the camera capture everything, and then trust me, I know who to show the material to, and it won't go away. Uncle Benjamin, I realize you're a lawman, but it's one thing to have a criminal altercation and another. This needs to go to court. That's right, sweet man. What did you think? Gangbangers in black cars are gonna come in and shoot everybody, and that's it. No, we're just gonna show them all up. And then there's the lawyers, the courts, and of course, the media. Don't worry about that. Just keep your ear to the ground at your job and try to make sure that nothing happens to Kathy during these days. By the way, who's giving her the sedation shots? Yeah, there's this Liam. Orderly, big guy with huge fists. Why? Try to make sure you get the job. You make sure you don't give the girl the shots. She has to come off the drugs and be, so to speak, sober and clear-headed when it all comes to a head. But even if things don't work out, just keep an eye on her. Michael nodded his head and smiled, acknowledging the breakfast. He himself hadn't noticed how hungry he'd gotten in 24 hours and practically gobbled up everything he'd prepared in one fell swoop. Yes, he had a good appetite. The landlord looked at the young orderly and smiled. The man brewed tea and took out his favorite girlfriends. Let's drink tea. And listen to me carefully for now. Michael nodded his head, began to listen to the old thief. He told him that Kathy, supposedly the daughter of one of the street Petersburg authorities, it was time to close the studio, and his help would be very helpful. And she wasn't mentally ill, more like a kidnapping victim. Half an hour later, the guy was on his way home. Uncle Benjamin's gonna go, or my mother and grandmother will be worried. And you call me if you need anything. And where will you find out? Okay, while we wait. If there's anything new, I'll drop by Grandma's. Thanks for the goodies. She's always spoiling the old man. What are you, an old man? You'll give the young ones a head start, won't you? And shaking hands, the neighbors parted. Michael opened the door and from the doorstep heard the smell of his grandmother's famous PR. She at his place always cooked her signature delicious and grandmother's pie. Smells like from the doorstep. Why'd you stay late at work? Oh no, I stopped by my neighbor Benjamin's. But they're to talk and I was going to talk to the old fella about something. Mom, don't coach. No one's safe from jail or prison. We all could be, just like in my Elm's house, by the way. And the guy threw his backpack on the hall table and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. When he came out, he went into the kitchen, where breakfast was already on the table. Mom, I don't want any. I ate at work, but tea and cake would be great. Michael didn't tell her that he'd had breakfast at the old thug's. He didn't want to make his mother nervous. The woman looked at him carefully, but didn't say anything. Only the grandmother, apparently, guessed where her grandson had eaten, but shook her head, said nothing. Grandson, but I just put the pie on. We'll be ready only in half an hour. In the meantime, bear with me. All right, I'll help Siberia in the meantime. One boy nodded his head and gave his grandmother a peck on the cheek and went back to his room. Michael spent these days at home, waiting for information from Benjamin, but he was silent. They crossed paths in the yard a couple of times, but the neighbor only said hello and didn't say anything. And the guy didn't really insist. He understood that if he didn't say anything, it was the right thing to do. But on Sunday, Benjamin decided to check the familiar basement and take the camera. He didn't tell his neighbor about his plans. He decided to take the tape first, see what he had, and then act according to the situation. Late at night, Benjamin, as he did the first time, went to the cellar door and looked around. Everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Come on, he had to go get the camera anyway, and he slipped downstairs, opened the greased door, and froze on the threshold. The man listened carefully to the sounds, but the silence was sepulchral. With quiet shuffling steps, Benjamin approached the very last door, orbited it, and varnished it and lifted it. At the keyhole, he listened carefully. Quiet. So the studio is not working for its intended purpose today. That's fine, no one will interfere. Quickly removing the camera, Benjamin headed for the exit, and just as quickly went out and closed the door as he came in. But as he passed the women's quarters, the man didn't hold back. He walked over to one of the dimly lit windows and peered through it at a bed and a dark-haired woman sitting on it. A woman dressed in a short dress with ribbons in her hair. Yes, thought the man. Another victim. How did I get the camera in time? He mentally pitied her because he knew what would happen next. But on the other hand, what could he do now? Nothing. Once outside, Benjamin walked home as before, pondering what he would see on the tape at home. He inserted the flash drive into the TV. The man began to watch the video, and what he saw there only confirmed his suspicions. And the worst and most disgusting, he angrily turned off the TV after a few minutes of watching, threw the remote on the couch, and went out onto the balcony. Yeah, that was to be expected. Okay, now we can show Alex all of this. And then let him think how to deal with these creatures and tell Kathy about it. Benjamin smoked a long time to calm down, and understandably so. Seeing all that filth, although he is a thief and experienced, has seen a lot in his life, but such a man has always respected women. But how do they even do it? They're sick women. It's unthinkable. And he couldn't find an answer. What's there to say? Mental illness must have its own degree of variance, or maybe it's congenital. Who knows? Benjamin threw the cigarette butt down, and went to bed. What was it, though? Even after a couple of minutes of watching, he was shivering. But apparently, fatigue and emotion took over, and the man fell into a deep but restless sleep. Already, in the morning, Benjamin was on duty on the balcony to look for Michael, who had to return from work. And when he appeared at the entrance, he called him and gestured for him to come up to him. "Uncle Benjamin, anything new?" "Yes, not on our honor. Remember I told you I put a camera in the basement?" Benjamin nodded and beckoned him into the hall, turned on the video, and let him watch. It was filmed by Michael. The orderly was horrified to see the head doctor and his cronies having fun with sick women at night. He certainly did not expect such a thing. The boy closed his eyes and quietly said, "Turn it all off." Benjamin did not argue. It was really disgusting. He sat there and didn't know how to go on living with it. Opening his eyes, he looked at the landlord and asked if he had anything to drink. He nodded his head and took out a bottle of vodka from the bar. He hadn't been drinking for a long time, but he always had alcohol just in case, and now he put a glass of white vodka on his neighbor's face. He held it out and said, "Wait, I'll bring snacks." But Michael did not wait for an appetizer, but drank the vodka in one fell swoop and sniffed it with his sleeve. At that minute, the host entered the room with a slice of sausage and cheese, but the guy nodded his head negatively and said, "I can have some more vodka, but at least you're behind the ring." Benjamin poured, sat down next to him. Michael drank this glass in one breath, and now he took a snack and looked at the old thief attentively, talking about what we'll do, what we won't do, and what you'll do. "I already thought to show to whom it is necessary to give a report to their own, and I will wait what they will tell me. But I think it won't take long to get a reaction. I also asked you here on purpose. I want to warn you that there may be some serious inspections at your clinic in the near future. I'm aware of that. I hope everything's legal and these assholes don't get away with it. Don't worry, they won't. You tell me, how's Kathy? How can I tell you? I got the head doctor to let me give her shots, just for show. But I didn't. But then, you see, Uncle Benjamin, she came into the clinic sort of hypnotized. So, she probably doesn't realize where she is. Or maybe it's like, she's in there. And is she really mentally damaged? I hope not. Although we can't rule out that possibility. But now, the main thing is to get her out of there. And then other specialists will deal with her." And Michael nodded his head. He was sober as a glass even after 2 glasses of alcohol. Apparently, the nervous shock did not let the alcohol to work. The guy sat on his neighbor's couch for a while longer, silently leaned back, then looked at the man and said, "I'm going home. I need to be good. Just Michael, I'm begging you, don't do anything on your own right now. Do you realize how dangerous this is? That's one thing. And secondly, you can't do anything on your own. You'll only make things worse for yourself and Kathy and the other patients." The boy nodded his head. He realized he was right. And it was stupid and dangerous to take any action now. All he could do was wait. But he didn't wait long. The very next day, he was summoned to work. "Michael, good morning. Is no bothering you? You've been summoned to work immediately." The head doctor's voice was frightened and trembling. "Good morning. What's wrong?" the guy asked. It was just for show. Did he realize what might be going on in his clinic? Nothing yet. Come on over." And the head doctor hung up. "Yeah, that's how you guys got moving." Apparently, the neighbor got the materials to the right place. And now the guy quickly got dressed and started to leave the apartment when he was stopped on the doorstep by his grandmother. "Michael, what are you doing up so early?" The chief of medicine called. "I have to go to work for my shift." "So you didn't even bring any food?" "No, I didn't have a shift. There's something going on, and it's probably an emergency." "Okay." Then he slammed the door and 5 minutes later he was at work. And what he saw made the guy very happy. A whole brigade of enforcers were crowding around the main entrance. Orderlies and doctors nervously stood and smoked in the distance, and patients were carefully taken out and put into ambulances. Michael approached the orderly Liam and asked Liam, "What is going on?" "Don't you see, OMON, we're raiding and cleaning up, and that someone is selling drugs. Go higher. Someone organized a porn studio in our basement, and they blamed it on our head doctor and a few of his henchmen. That's what it's all about." Michael made a surprised face, but at that very moment he saw Kathy being taken out of the women's building by 2 men and carefully put into a black Jeep. So she really was the daughter of a reputable thief. But thank God she wasn't mentally ill. He looked at her and was startled by the hand on his shoulder. "It was you, Michael." The voice was commanding and quiet at the same time. He turned around and saw a man dressed in an expensive suit. He immediately realized that he was either one of the highest representatives of the government or a criminal authority. Michael nodded his head and only wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the man was ahead of him. "I'm Alexander, Kathy's father. Benjamin, your neighbor, told me everything about you, about your help. So thank you for bringing my daughter back. You're welcome. I know it doesn't have to be this way. It's mean and wrong. Kathy's gonna be okay." The man nodded his head and looked at the boy carefully. But he didn't say anything. And what could he say if he didn't know anything about his child's condition? But God willing, everything would be fine. He just nodded his head once more, thanked him quietly, and turned around and walked to his car, which immediately sped away. As soon as he closed the door, Michael stared after him for a few minutes, reflecting on the situation, and at that moment the chief doctor and his associates were being loaded into the truck. It was all over. Michael did not notice how his neighbor Benjamin quietly approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. Now all the members of the Corps de Ballet have been captured and sent to places not so remote. Believe me, my contacts will make sure of that. And Kathy, it was her dad, but in a black BMW. Yeah, I think she'll be fine. And you, neighbor, thanks for pulling her and the other women out of that bondage." Michael raised an eyebrow, perplexed, not really understanding what the neighbor was saying, but he immediately clarified. "You see, Kathy isn't the only healthy woman in this almshouse. Many beauties were just grabbed on the street and brought here under the guise of one or another mental disorder. And what was done to them next? You know what I mean. Now the shop's been shut down. And a special big thank you from my friends." The neighbor patted him on the shoulder and went home. And Michael stood on the street and smoked for a long time, realizing that there could be a great number of such clinics all over the country. After all, there will always be people like his chief physician, the chief of police, prone to such entertainments. But now, Michael realized that there was one less clinic of debauchery, and it was his direct merit. He walked home and thought about how a person's fate can turn out. Even take Noah, the head doctor, a respected man, and an excellent specialist. But something drove him to such a crime. Kathy is the daughter of a wealthy father, albeit with a criminal record, intelligent, and beautiful. She had suffered at the hands of non-humans who could simply stab her with drugs to the point of being a vegetable. But that's all in the past now, and his town can breathe easy. "Oh, Michael, you got home from work so fast, lady. How's Grandma's pie cooking?" The grandmother looked at her grandson and realized everything on his face. She smiled and put her specialty pie on the table, pouring her grandson some tea-flavored tea. The woman knew that now everything would be fine in this town, and certainly no one else would get hurt. And all of this was due to her grandson. She was proud of him, as any grandmother would be. After all, it is probably right to say that one loves one's grandchildren more than one loves one's own children. Betty smiled, and after patting him on the head, sat down on a chair and carefully washed her specialty pie with doctors like him, flying in both cheeks. One could be calm for every patient, for everyone.